and welcome to the LabLife Conference 2024. My name is Alice and I'm part of the Hello Bio team and I will be your host for today. This is the second LabLife Conference ever, and once again we've invited a lineup of brilliant life scientists from around the world to join us and share their knowledge, insight, wisdom and experience of life inside and outside the lab. Our goal today is to provide insight, tips and inspiration to support you in developing the lab and life skills that you need to build a successful life science career. And the reason we created this conference is that every single member of the Hello Bio team is incredibly passionate about supporting early career life scientists and life science research. Every member of our leadership team has worked in labs, which means they understand the emotional and logistical challenges that researchers face at every stage of their careers. Now, over the last few years, we've built our blog. We've built guides that we've collaboratively created with life scientists, and we've of course grown our annual Lab Heroes Awards. We have been continually inspired by the incredible spirit of community among life scientists and the huge willingness to help each other navigate life inside and outside the lab. And that's what has led us to create the LabLife Conference. So before we introduce our first speaker, I'll hand over to Dr Sam Roome, co-founder and director of Hello Bio, to say a few words.
Thanks, Alice. Right, let me just quickly share my screen. I'm just going to give a very quick whirlwind intro now for those of you who aren't familiar with Hello Bio at all. A group of friends we set up nearly a decade ago now with the sole aim of supporting scientists in any way that we could. As between us, we had expertise in chemistry, pharmacology, that's me, quality control. We started out by offering low-cost biochemicals for life science. That's how we felt we could help the most. But that's grown substantially, and we now offer antibodies, reagents, peptides, so much more, at prices up to half that of other suppliers. And that's something we are really proud of. We hope it's helping a lot of researchers, particularly, currently science funding is being squeezed sort of more than ever before. But the support we offer scientists now, as Alice mentioned, is so much more than just those amazing low prices on our products. So, for example, we've helped hundreds of scientists with our early career scientist grants. We've just launched an exciting free trial programme, and there is, of course, our blog, again, as Alice mentioned, which is I think, a fabulous resource. It covers a myriad of topics, many relevant to early career scientists. And the blog wouldn't have been possible at all without the help of our very talented guest authors and contributors who are just so generous with their time and their expertise and really willing to share their knowledge. And many of them we are going to meet and hear from today. So yeah, that's enough for me. I really hope you get a lot out of the sessions today. So let me hand back to Alice, who is going to be your very super friendly, capable guide for the day. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much, Sam. So today we have 4 talks and 2 panel discussions for you, and we will be covering topics including networking, leadership, funding, careers, publications and well-being. We will be taking 2 15-minute breaks. So the first one will be around 2:15 UK time and another around 3:30 UK time. And we will be wrapping up and closing the event at around 5 p.m. UK time. Each of our speakers will be talking for around 15 to 20 minutes, leaving us 10 to 15 minutes for questions after their talks. If you have any questions for our speakers that come up while they're presenting, please do type them into the Q&A or into the chat. We will probably only have time for 2 to 3 questions after each speaker, so I do apologise if we don't get to your question. Hopefully our speakers will be able to stick around for a little while after their talks and reply to any questions that we don't get around to discussing on camera in the chat or via the Q&A. If you have any technical questions or any questions about Hello Bio as we go through the day, my colleagues Sam and Hannah will be keeping an eye on the chat and they will get back to you as soon as they can. So our first speaker today is Elodie Chabrol. Elodie is a science communicator and the International Director of Pint of Science. And today Elodie is going to be talking about how to master networking for science, boost your profile and build valuable connections. So take it away, Elodie, over to you.
Thank you. So yes, I'm actually putting my timer there. So I want to talk to you about networking and how to boost your profile, because I think it's really, really important in science, and sometimes we forget a bit. So this is a picture of my last science meeting that I've done, and I think one of the places that are really good for that definitely are science meetings. And I'm going to try to give you tips to master the networking, not just during the science meetings, but online, offline, really trying to make the most of it effortlessly, I hope. And I hope you're going to start today, actually. So, you know, at the moment, everyone is asking ChatGPT for everything. So I was like, oh, let's ask ChatGPT, what is networking? And apparently for ChatGPT, networking is putting computer and technology together to share resources and information. And I thought, okay, it's not really that. It's, you know, they are just talking, it's just talking about computers, but actually in real life, it's that. Why would you do networking? You know, often we think we are in the lab, we're seeing collaborators, we are having people in the lab. Why would I do that? But it's actually really good for supporting your later scientific life. It's good to build a community. So community, it's good to find out about workshops. Maybe sometimes about backgrounds, because yes, when you are in the lab, you have a lot of collaborators, you might have a lot of people in the lab, but you're often in your own bubble and you only know about the grants and the workshops and everything that is happening inside this bubble. And sometimes it's really good to just, like, you know, go out of the bubble, meet people, know what's happening. I heard lots of scientists saying that on Twitter, they find out about so many things, you know, like workshops, grants, but also papers that they wouldn't maybe have seen otherwise. So it's really, really important. As a scientist, obviously, it's nice because it can help you to find collaborations. Again, when you have your own little network, sometimes you don't go and look for like other things, other labs, other people. Obviously, it's good to communicate about your projects. Science communication is something that is very asked at the moment, and the bigger network, especially online, the better you can communicate about your projects, and sometimes, you know, find things and find helpful ways of communicating about it as well. And also, if you're in the position of maybe wanting to change jobs, could be in academia, could be out of academia, you can really find jobs, but also people doing this kind of jobs and know what it is. You know, in academia, it's easy, you kind of know what they are. But if you want to leave academia at one point, you might actually want to talk to people about their jobs and what they do and what is their day-to-day life. And networking is really amazing for that. So the rules about networking, I would say there are several, but the three very important ones. The first one is don't network only when you need it. Some people say, oh yeah, you know, I'm looking for a job, so I'm going to start networking now. But it's too late, because when you need it, you need to actually have a network that is built, because otherwise you have no one around you. When you need to find collaborators, if you didn't start networking already before, you're going to have like an empty room or an empty network to talk to. So it's really important that it becomes some kind of a routine to do things whenever you go to meetings, to try to like expand your network and meet new people online. You know, that you try to really have some consistency on going networking online. So this is really important. Also, it's really important to prepare, you know. If you meet people, but you don't know what to tell them or how to present yourself, if you go online, but you really don't know what to do, then it's not going to be very successful. So the very important thing is to prepare. I'm going to explain quickly how to do that. And also, people tend to think about networking when they need it. but it's a two-way thing. You really have to, you know, sometimes try to help people, put people in contact. Sometimes you hear during meetings that they are looking for someone doing that, or working on some kind of thing. It might not be your thing, it might not be your skill, but you might know something that does it, someone, sorry, that does it. And linking those two people together, first, it's an amazing feeling. And also, it's really a way of giving to the network. So it's not just taking from the network, it's also giving. And I think it's really important because people really appreciate that. So when you think about networking, obviously, often you think about, you know, meetings, so in person, and you think about online, all the social network. And sometimes you really think like it's very, very different. One is really like digital, the other one is in person. You might not see the same people and everything, but actually it's not that different. Most of the time it's not separated, and actually to do the best networking you can, it's the best to mix them. So for example, to prepare, if you go to a meeting, you can prepare it online. You can ask on your social network platforms, who is going to that meeting? Often the meetings have hashtags and everything. You can ask people who is going. In science meetings, sometimes you have thousands of people going to the same meeting, and it's really hard to read like all the names, you know, and to be sure you're not missing anyone. Asking online who's going to the meeting, you can actually meet someone that would be outside of your bubble, that you outside of your radar. You might have not seen that person otherwise, but that person can pop in and say, oh, let's have a coffee, let's have a chat, and you can actually have very meaningful conversation. You can also follow up in real life. You know, you meet someone at a meeting, and if you don't take or don't connect with them online, then it means that it's someone that you connected with, but you can take their email, but it's way more awkward to keep a connection via email, because it means that you need to email something like, oh, how are you, whatever. And at the moment, it's much easier to follow them online, to like their posts, or to discuss on Twitter, for example. So it's really a nice way. So if you meet someone you really like offline, in person, really don't hesitate to add them on LinkedIn, on Twitter, and to follow them, and then you can really keep the conversation. And so it's really important that when you network, you don't see the online and in person separated, but online and in person are really connected, and each of the others is like a tool to help you build better connections. The first very important step, I would say, is to prepare your online profile, because if you meet people in real life and then they follow you on LinkedIn, on Twitter, but you don't have your name, your bio is very empty, people might not actually really follow you, because they might not know what you're doing, or you know, they might not be sure you're actually using social media, so they might not do it at all. If you don't have any of the platform, Twitter or LinkedIn, it's not update your profile, it's create one right now. And it's the same. If you online, you want to reach out to people and you have an empty profile, people might not react to the connection, might not connect with you, because it's just human, you know, it's just, I don't know who you are, I don't know what you're talking about, I don't know what you do in your life. So I'm not going to click connect, because I don't know, it feels a bit like either it's a bot or it's an empty profile. So it's really an important thing. You don't have to have the most updated profile ever, but at least your name, some pictures, what you do, you know, some keywords about what you do, some bios. On Twitter, maybe a link to the website, or if you don't have a website, it could be to your LinkedIn profile. It could be also to your web lab website. But really try to have an online profile updated, because if you try to connect with someone online, definitely they are not going to react if they don't know who you are, and in person, if they see that, they might not actually add you. So update it now, at least the minimum. And what you can start doing as well is add contacts. So on Twitter, you can follow people. On LinkedIn, you can do two different things. You can follow them. So following means not necessarily being able to send emails or to send messages. And if you contact them, Sometimes you have to dig a bit in the profile to contact them and connect with them. Then you can message them. The best thing is to give a bit of context. So if you contact someone that you don't know in real life and you haven't met just before, it's nice to say, oh, you know, I'm interested in that, so that's why I'm contacting you, and it would be really nice to have you in my network. In-person networking, so it's really important that you know how to present yourself, how to introduce yourself. So sometimes it's good to have a little pitch about you. So it feels really like marketing. But for example, I had a friend that was doing a PhD in some kind of very specific type of epilepsy, and she was working with a molecule trying to cure epilepsy in rats. And she was always saying like, oh, I'm trying to cure epilepsy with this, like the name of the molecule. And she wasn't saying epilepsy, she was saying like the type of very like jargony type of epilepsy, and people were not responding to that. But then one day she realized, okay, this molecule, you find it in coconut, so maybe I could, you know, try to say I'm curing epilepsy with coconut. And then people are asking you questions, they want to know more. So it's good to have a little pitch about you ready, like just to help the connection, like give people a bit of curiosity about what you do and what you want to what you're researching on and what you want to do with them. Obviously, you don't have one fits all, you know. When you meet someone, you have to think about, what do I want to do with them? Do I want to meet that person for a job? Do I want to meet that person for a collaboration, just because I think they are doing something really cool? And the pitch is not going to be necessarily the same. And if it's a scientist in really your domain, you might have more jargon than if it's a scientist a bit outside of your domain. So really try to have like few ideas of how to introduce yourself, and really like have ways of presenting yourself. When you're in person, don't hesitate to go out of your comfort zone. So often when we go to meetings, we're sticking with the same people, sometimes the lab people, and we're finishing the meeting, we haven't met anyone new. And it's not really the point of the meeting. So I know sometimes it's a bit painful. You don't really want to go out of your comfort zone, but sometimes it's really nice to try to force yourself. You can decide, have a challenge, you know, like I have to meet one new person every day at the conference I'm going to. And again, prepare. So make sure you know who's there. Maybe you prepared it on social media to make sure you can make the most of the networking before you're going to any meeting. So yeah, how to prepare, find out about the kind of person you will meet, decide what you want from the interaction. So really, is it a job? Is it collaboration? Is it technical help? Do you want just to meet someone really cool? And really, if you have some specific people you want to talk to, it's important to try to get information on them before. I'm not saying stalk people before you go to meetings, but a number of people approach you and say, I really like what you do, and then they ask you questions that are openly put on internet, on LinkedIn, on Twitter. Often people put their resumes, you know, you can know what they do. And when you are approached by someone that has questions about you, but very interesting ones that prove that they looked a bit what you're doing, it's very interesting. When you have people that are asking very like questions that you've answered 1,000 times and it's really openly online or on LinkedIn, you know, you can really just read the resume. You feel a bit like, you know, come on, you could have prepared. So if you want to really have a nice first impression, you can really prepare. Make sure you know what people are doing and go and talk to them about that. Online networking, so make sure you have your bio updated. So I think, yeah, I'm insisting on that, but it's really, really important. Add a note when you're adding someone you don't know yet, and prepare and really gather information before. It's like in-person meeting, and it's really important to kind of like approach them. If you want to ask them about their experience, about their job, try to read as much as possible on those people, especially if it's high profile people, they might not have a lot of time. So if you ask them questions that, you know, the answer is already in their profile, they are going to be a bit annoyed. One thing that is very, very, very important when you're networking is to remember that it's not a Pokemon, you know, you don't have to catch them all, just some of them, the most important one, and the ones that are definitely going to going to be important for you. So on LinkedIn, you don't want necessarily to connect with everyone. You want to connect with the right people. So that's why sometimes it takes a bit of time to prepare, to research like who would be interesting to contact, who would be really helping you. It's also important to prepare before and to prepare, I'm going to say that a third time, but to prepare your bio and everything, because when you connect to someone, it's a unique chance and you have it only once. So when you send the connection on LinkedIn, if you're not prepared, if your profile is not updated, the person's going to look at your page and they're not going to follow you, they're not going to connect, and that's done. You're going to have missed this possibility. So instead of trying to add as many people as possible, try to really work on the right ones and try to prepare yourself as much as possible before that. And let's have a practical exercise. So what if you could add like speakers from today on LinkedIn or Twitter? Again, I'm not saying to add everyone, but if you like a talk today, really a lot, add the speakers, add also all the people from Hello Bio, and thank them for organizing this amazing afternoon. But I think this is a practical exercise that you could start already today. Try to add speakers, and even like if you want to say a little word on the talks, it's always nice when you give a talk that someone is giving feedback on it, and it could help you already build your network from today. So if you have other questions, I'm super happy and super willing to answer them. So you can contact us. This is my team. So this is my assistant, my furry assistant. She will probably ignore your message, but I will very be happy to reply.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Elodie. Any presentation that's got Pokemon in it is great by me.
Yeah.
So we'll see if any questions come in the chat. You're having some thank yous flooding in, which is great. One of the things that I was really keen to ask you is I speak to a lot of people who I encourage to get out there and network, and for some people they just get this look of complete horror in their eyes because it's just it completely goes against what they're used to, because they might be very introverted and very nervous. So have you got any real like beginners tips for people who are really introverted, who maybe get really anxious about social situations? Have you got any tips for them to get started in building their confidence with networking?
I think preparing is the best way, because if you don't prepare, you might actually not be sure what to say to that person, end up with like, I don't know, trying to be like, oh, hi, I'm doing that. And then, you're going to feel really weird, and you might actually feel not, in control of the situation. And you might actually have really bad feelings about what's happening. So the more you prepare, the better it is. And then when you're going to talk to people, you're going to have this little speech, rehearsed. You're going to know how to introduce yourself. If you look, look for information about the people, then they're going to talk to you about what they do. You might be familiar with it, So preparing, I think, when you're not really liking it and you're not sure, I think it's the best. Because if you don't prepare, you're going to be in a situation that is going to be probably not the best for you, and you might actually not want to continue and not want to do it again because it was really weird. And often you don't think about preparing networking because it's a thing that, it really depends. People might pop in and everything. But if you prepare a little pitch, depending on who you're going to meet, if it's like collaborators or if it's like bosses that you're a bit worried to meet, and, it might really, really help.
Fantastic. That's brilliant. And we've got a couple of comments in the chat. Sam says, thank you, Elodie. I love the idea of having a pitch ready, which again was what we were just saying, and your example of curing epilepsy with coconuts. And Sarah says, I heard if you treat a meeting like a coaching session, no elevator talk needed. I'm so bad at these. Ask questions instead. People love it when you're interested in them. The problem is if you're both asking questions.
Exactly. But that's the thing. If you prepare a bit before, you know what the right questions to ask. So it's not necessarily the questions that are very obvious and it's going to be a bit boring for the person to answer. It's going to be questions that are actually relevant to what they do. And if you talk about something that you've read about them, they might be like, wow, this person has done their job. And actually, they're going to be like, wow, okay, I'm impressed. I'm really happy to answer your question. And they're going to engage way more than if you're like, oh, okay, so who are you? What are you doing? You know, like very generic questions. So that's why preparing, like not stalking, but checking what this person is doing that I really want to meet. So that's why I'm saying it's better to try to select people you want to interact with than trying to catch them all. Because catch them all is going to be very generic. So maybe you can do that as like another level. When you're super confident with networking, you can talk to anyone and whatever, it's fine. But at the very beginning, it's like select the people you want to talk to, really.
I love that. And one of my tricks when I go out networking is I have not got any on today, but I have quite a lot of very bright, colourful, like funky earrings, funky necklaces, like bright colours. And
and I
find that if you go to a conference and you're wearing something that's a bit of a statement, it can kind of get over the awkwardness. Like it acts like a bit of an icebreaker where people will come up to you and go, oh, I love your shirt, or I love your earrings, or I love your necklace. So that can be a really just nice little icebreaker as well.
Exactly, and be yourself, you know, like if you want to wear this crazy necklace, do it. This crazy jacket or whatever, do it. And actually it's showing who you are. And sometimes it's definitely a conversation starter, which is it's great. I have actually a heart necklace that everyone is already staring at during meetings, and I'm often putting it because I know everyone's going to ask me questions about it, and I know it's going to be a nice icebreaker.
Yeah. Absolutely. I really love dinosaurs, and I've got a lot of necklaces with dinosaurs on, and that just attracts everyone who likes dinosaurs, which is a good group of people. Well, if we don't have any other questions, thank you so much, Elodie. That was absolutely brilliant and full of helpful tips. Feel free to hang around in the chat, share your details so that everyone knows where to find you. And we will move on to our panel. So thank you so much.
Thank you, and thank you for organizing this and inviting me. Thank you.
Oh, my absolute pleasure, Elodie. Thank you. Next, we will be moving on to our first panel of the day, and Elizabeth, take it away for the panel discussion.
Thank you so much. It is great to be here today. I am happy to chair this panel and to get to know you two. Since we've never really met before, I'm excited to hear your stories and hear your advice about this topic. I think that leadership and communication is something that always needs to be worked on, even if you are personally think you're great at it. I think there's always room for improvement. So I think new stories are always welcome and new advice is always welcome. And so just a little bit more about myself. I'll introduce myself briefly, and then I'm going to have each of you introduce yourselves. And so I'm Elizabeth Berry. As I said, I'm a postdoctoral fellow at New York Medical College, and I study the realm of neuroscience, and I work on the impact that opioids have on the orexin system in the brain. And I use a lot of electrophysiology and a lot of histological techniques. And my experience with being a leader or a team player involves being a PhD student, since I just graduated this past May, and involves me collaborating with students who are younger than me, and also collaborating with my chair committee members as well as my PI. And so I have a perspective that's from the student level. And then you two, I think, have very different perspectives. I'm excited that all of us are able to bring these different perspectives to the table. And so if you could please both introduce yourselves briefly, and then we'll get started into our 15-minute session with some questions. You can go ahead, Stuart, first.
Are you sure? Oh, okay, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. So I'm Stuart Maudsley. I'm a professor here at University of Antwerp. And I think I've been in science for about 30 years now. So I started off in the UK. I did my bachelor's and my PhD in pharmacology. So I too am an electrophysiologist. I used to be. I moved out of that into molecular biology, and I work extensively on G-protein coupled receptors, actually the targets of opioids and orexins that you're working on. So
really?
Yes, we definitely have. And I'm very much interested in, actually, at the moment, I'm working on something related to Alzheimer's at the moment. So, and from my experience, I'd like to think I've done the whole range. I've been an undergraduate, I've been a postgraduate, I've been a postdoc, I've been a PI, I've been a departmental chair, I've been a director of institutes. So I've experienced both the top and at the bottom, although, you know, using such phrases top and bottom is sort of rather hierarchical. I think it's just a case of more or less experience. And as you get on, you realize that everyone can be right and everyone can have important input, but somebody who is fairly green and new to science, or somebody who's been in science for, like me, for about 30 years. So that's just a little bit of my experience. And so I deal with a lab every day, or deal with a group or a department every day. So it's sort of a lot of what you realize, a lot of what science is controlling the activity of people to make sure everything works effectively. And I'm very much interested in a mission focus. I think at the end of the day, we're all sort of servants to science. You know, we hold this thing up as science as this sort of, not really a pinnacle of truth, but we're trying to get there. You know, and one of our best phrases is progress, not perfection. We're never going to get to perfection, but we hope to make progress every day. It could be big, could be small. And that could be intellectual, could be personal, or could be academic. So as long as we always focus on daily progress, we'll find out that we'll eventually get there. So over to you, Sarah.
Hello.
Thanks,
Can you hear me?
Yep, all
Yes,
good.
great. I'm Sarah Gruneisen. I started out actually back in my university days as a chemical engineering major. At the time, I was minoring in both computer science and music. And I shifted my degree after the end of my third year of chemical engineering into computer science and engineering. And I was a software engineer for a good 20 years, and I had a hat in many different positions, from agile coach to change manager to having my own business and doing all kinds of things related to computer science and engineering. Now I am a director of engineering at a company called Novoda based in London. And I also have my own coaching business. So I am a leadership trainer and coach. So that's just a little bit about me.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So now for the exciting part, we can get into the actual questions to give people advice, give our experiences over. And so we have about 15 minutes for this block. And I want each of you to be able to contribute to each of the questions. So make sure that you give the other person enough room to answer. So question number 1. So as a team member, how can you effectively manage upwards and ensure collaboration runs smoothly when leadership is not effective? Who wants to take this first?
Over to you, Sarah.
Okay. So when I am trying to manage up, let's say, it starts with, it's actually quite similar to, let's say, trying to collaborate with someone at your level. It's about trying to see the person, hear them, understand them. What is beneath what they're asking for? Usually the reason that a person would manage up is because they're feeling, for example, micromanaged. That's like a typical scenario. And micromanagement feels very daunting. It feels very stressful. Someone is checking in on you. You don't feel trusted. You don't feel like you have any autonomy. And it's very easy to go into this feeling of this person is a-hole, or something is horrible about this person. You can even go into thinking that they're a narcissist or something like this. However, statistically, most are probably not narcissists. There's very few people with NPD in the world. So usually what is driving this person's behavior is some need that is lacking, something that is in their core value system, something that they need to thrive, and it's not there in that room with you at that moment. So the best way I feel like to create this connection is to try to get to that core need. So let's say you, for example, myself, one of my core needs is autonomy and trust, authenticity. Reliability is one of my core values. I may accidentally also step into a micromanaging type of situation if I don't feel like you're being reliable. You said you're going to do something and then it's not being delivered. There's a good way to have those conversations and there's a not so great way to have those conversations. And usually the best way to step into those conversations is to start with I am feeling this. I am feeling stressed. I don't feel I can move forward with my plans. I'm feeling irritated, and this is because my core need is reliability. And when I see this, that, think scientifically, think on facts happening. Then these feelings are triggered in me. When you talk like that, you're not blaming the other person for your feelings, because as we all know, my feelings of reliability could be rooted in my past. Maybe my parents were never there when I needed them to be there, and therefore it's something that I need drastically, which someone else you might work with might not need as much. So now let's go back to leading up. It's about helping that manager start speaking in I instead of you. So when they're saying, "Hey, you're so unreliable," or you're just not paying any attention, or you just don't care, instead of getting into the defense, it's like, I'm hearing what you say, and that's your perspective, and everyone can have their own perspective. But what are you feeling? What is your need here? What are the facts? What are we trying to address? And what can we do to get to that place where you can feel more confident moving forward? So that is, let's say, a very condensed way of leading up. Is just about getting the other person to their feelings and getting them to talk in I, when maybe at the beginning they start with you, and knowing yourself well enough not to go into defense right away. That is not actually probably about you.
Absolutely. I think that's really important to point out, because from a student perspective, you might immediately go on the defensive and not know why you're on the defensive, and not realize that your superior is talking in those you terms, and that's what's making you feel anxious.
The defense. Yeah,
right, exactly. So I think
nobody knows you.
Like exactly, you know. Right. So if you could like actually kind of pull yourself out of it, think about what words were actually being said and pinpoint that, I think that's a step in the right direction. I think that's great. Thanks so much.
No problem.
I think those are some really interesting points, and it's a really nice dissection that you've done on some of the aspects of managing up. I've experienced this both myself personally, and I've been on the receiving end of it personally, as everyone has. And I think it's very nice that you said that with respect to a bit of introspection first about why am I doing this, what do I need, and but also from my perspective as well, a lot of science and a lot of motivation in people is, I've always found, it's the maintenance on the big picture. And the reason why we're doing this is a lot of people feel disenfranchised when they feel disconnected from the mission, from the project, from the program. And often, as you said, with micromanagement, you might feel as an underling in a department or in a lab is that you're just not part of that big machine. You're actually separated. You're taken out of the equation somehow, and you're in like a little alternative cycle. You're not actually part of that greater structure. So in a way, feelings of disengagement do engender this concept of I need to engineer myself back into the program. So actually, the first thing to do if you are feeling in this situation is to, first of all, instantly, honestly discuss this with your line manager above and say, I'm not feeling it. I don't know exactly why I'm not feeling it, but let's talk about it. And that's what you want to hear as a manager, is that sort of, let's talk about it first, rather than do actions. You know, what you don't want them to do is to instantly go around you and go up to your superior and say, oh, I'm having problems. Because then as soon as your line manager finds out, he's going to go, or she is going to go, dude, the communication's broken down. So it's much better to start it off with honesty, because that's what they want to hear. You always want to hear. I mean, as a leader, scientist, whatever, you thrive and you dream that all you'll ever get is good news. It's not gonna happen. Sorry people, it's not gonna happen. It's largely bad news, but that's okay. That's the way it is. Don't see it as bad news. Just see it as news. Just see it as, if science was easy, it would have all been done by now. It's a simple fact. It's just about, sort of, if I was to encapsulate my sort of like modus operandi as a scientist, is just fixing problems. That's all you do is fix problems. They can be academic, they can be technical, they can be intellectual, they can be personal. If you can just fix problems, you're going to be the greatest scientist and researcher ever. So you should never feel as though in this circumstance where there could be a lack of engagement of a person, don't take it personally. It's part of a program. We're all part of this big machine called science. It's not, I don't own it, you don't own it. It's a thing. It's contribution to the great increase of knowledge. So in a way, having the first honest discussion first, because then everyone will appreciate it. Because I'm sure if you talk to your manager, they might also have that exact same feeling to their superior. But they don't want to tell you that because they have to maintain this sort of sphere of infallibility. So that's one thing. It's important to realize that humbling, even though, let's say you're like a first year grad student or something, you might feel as though you're at the bottom of the totem pole. Everyone above you is just the same. They're just a little bit older. They also have anxiety and fear over their position in the chain. So it's actually normal. It's perfectly normal. And if you're not paying attention and you're not engaging your personal feelings and your drive in with the program, I'd be worried. I would want you to feel a little upset at times, because if you didn't, it means you don't care. And
Absolutely.
That's a worse problem. So
Exactly.
Yeah.
We shouldn't be worried about these issues. It's perfectly normal.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's great. I think if an open communication environment can be built, then the chain, the people on the bottom of the totem pole and all throughout would feel comfortable coming to each other and actually bringing these topics up. And I think that's the point that a lot of things struggle with. There's not the open communication that's laid out that you would feel comfortable coming to. And I think that leads us actually perfectly into the next question, because we want to talk about what your advice is for navigating conflict and when it arises and having difficult conversations. So how do you get that communication open so you can talk about the difficult things that come up? So maybe you can give us an example each that really stuck out to you through your years.
Okay. Well, actually, so here's my sort of take on dealing with anything like this, and dealing with all problems in science and research, full stop, is it's horses for courses. Every single situation has a unique contextuality. So I've never attacked the same issue. Let's say there's a conflict or whatever. I've never approached it in the same way each time. In the same way, I've never done research in the same way, in the same time in a paper. Every paper we do and every bit of research we do is an incremental change. So I've done everything. I've done everything from individual private meetings. And so actually, it's a bit like a legal case in a way. As a manager, when you're dealing with some issues, is the first thing you want to do is you want to do fact finding. You want to find as many, because often these things start with a single conversation. And that conversation is always from one person's point of view. So you have to sort of do what they call in the legal field discovery. So you have to do the discovery phase of really understanding what happens. And at that phase, sure, you can say, okay, I understand your grievance. I'll take this on board. I'll respond to you after I've done the discovery process. So that's done in a perfectly open way. Collect as much information as you can. Then the best thing to do, if they're agreeing, is to do this in a consensual manner. There's nothing worse than closed door meetings or clandestine meetings. That's the worst thing possible, because no one trusts the responses from them. As a manager, you're seen to be cloistering. And as another person in the lab, if they're not in the meeting, they don't know what's going on. So I've always tried to do things out in the open. And also, try your best not to inflame the situation. That's the hardest thing. When you make a big deal out of conflict, conflicts are going to happen every single day. And it's likely that virtually everyone in your lab will have a conflict with somebody else at some point. Clearly, there are some circumstances where this is serious, where there are legal ramifications. Then that's completely different. Normal day-to-day conflicts in the lab actually are much more common, thankfully, than the more serious accusations that can occur. That's a different situation. In this scenario, I'm talking about more day-to-day conflicts. So essentially, having an open practice, and we've actually had sessions in, very much like, I don't know if you've seen intervention, for people who are, addicted. It used to be on A&E, they'd always have the person, have their family and friends around, and they're trying to help them. We do that. We do interventions to try and solve the problem, not so much from a point of view of aiming. And the important thing here is not to aim it at one person, because it's very unlikely that conflicts are based on one person. It's normally a shared feel. And even if it is just that one person, other people are also involved. So never split the team up. Could be a big team, could be a small team, could be a group, could be a department. Never split the team up. Everything is done as a team. And the important thing is to try and, not to sort of kiss and make up on the first day, but tell everyone that this could take a while to sort out if there are long-term issues. And the best thing to do is to let people sleep on it. It really is. My goodness, it's amazing. A good night's rest and a bit of thought can solve a situation, because everyone makes bad decisions very quickly.
Give you a new perspective after you sleep.
Absolutely. It's sobering. It really is. So in this circumstance, I've just been talking about, relatively simple conflicts. When there are serious conflicts, part of that discovery phase, the most important thing is documentation. So that is critical. Hard and fast documentation is the most important thing. Let's say there's, some form of abuse, or there's some form of harassment. The most important thing is documentation, even if it's from the complainant first. Take written statements as soon as possible. Write everything down and keep it secure. Everything can only be done with written backup. It's much better to do that. So that's a sort of a practical approach to conflicts. And the most important thing is to understand that they're always going to happen. And the person who is suffering from it shouldn't feel victimized. The person who's trying to manage it shouldn't feel bad that this happened. So this often is often an issue as well. Managers can feel as though they failed if there are people having conflicts in the lab. It's normal. It's normal. But as I found, both academically, personally, and intellectually, doing it as a group is the most important thing.
I think that's a great point. Yeah, I really do. I think a lot of mentors typically go to the closed door instead of having the open lab. And I think that's a mistake now that you pointed out. And I really think that should be taken to heart, and everyone really should do the open door policy, because then everyone's included. You don't feel isolated, especially as someone on the bottom of the totem pole. And then you might feel like you can actually talk to the people in your lab about the issue instead of just festering with it by yourself. Thanks so much. What about you, Sarah?
What I think is very important is to realize that you can have two people in the same room experiencing the same event, yet seeing two different stories and feeling two different things based on past life experience, based on personality, based on emotional connections. So you can have completely different stories and both are factually correct. And that's something that's vital to know when you're a leader and somebody is coming to you with their story. I think that Stuart was already talking a little bit about this. I really try to never, although never is a big word, I'm human, I will also make this mistake sometimes, to jump into one of the three roles within the drama triangle. So you have the victim, you have the persecutor, and you have the hero. Very often you have the victim coming in and saying this horrible thing happened, and then you as a leader, oh, I am the hero, I'm going to come and save this. You have an opinion, but this person said sounds very horrible, and then you go and you try to fix it. That's not empowerment. Empowerment is instead getting this person to, similarly to what I mentioned in the last question, to factually think about what exactly happened. What are the facts without the feelings? So somebody doesn't show up to meetings, or they show up every day 15 minutes late, or they don't deliver the work on time, they deliver the work the next day. These are factual statements. And owning your own feelings with regards to those statements, and helping that person create their own courageous conversation around that. So this thing is happening, this is the feeling I have, and this is what I need in order to proceed, and empowering that person to step into that conversation themselves. I avoid, if at all possible, to be the one that starts the conversation. I try to encourage this person to have that conversation themselves. I will do role playing with them if they need it. I will even mediate if I need to. If you study mediation, mediation is really not picking a side. Instead, it's really about evaluating the facts and helping them get toward something, towards a resolution, which in a way, both people can thrive, both people can move forward, and there's not a right person and a wrong person. Again, as Stuart mentioned, there are the situations in which there's real sexual harassment, or somebody is doing something which is not inclusive in a very mean way, or doing something which is just against the rules. In this case, as he said, it is about documentation. And it's important when you are documenting to try to stick to facts. Instead of writing, oh, this person is a ... or they think this, you never know what another person is thinking. You never know what another person is feeling. Keep that out of it. Instead, keep factual. This person touched me on the butt, or this person asked me this inappropriate question. Don't say inappropriate. This person asked me this question, because the inappropriate is an opinion. So try to keep your, let's say, adjectives and personal opinions out of it. Keep to the facts, because then when later you want to go back and review it, we can look at it from different lenses, from different perspectives, and try to get a place forward together. So keep away from drama. Don't try to be a hero. Don't jump in as a persecutor. Try to empower the victim into a place of ownership, and empowering them to have this conversation themselves. If they feel unable to do this, offer to be a mediator in the situation. Don't pick sides. Try to stick to the facts, and try to get back to the roots of what both people need in that situation. What are they missing? What is the hurt? Where is that coming from? And in the end, if it's something which is really against the rules, or hurtful in a way that needs to have some kind of repercussions, document it, date it, and take out all of your superfluous adjectives and opinions about how people feel and what kind of statement that is. And that is a summary.
That's great. That's really, keeping the facts. I think that really ties into thinking, all right, do not blow up about something that happened. Don't escalate things in your mind. You're going to add adjectives into your mind, and then when you speak to your supervisor, they are going to come out of your mouth. So if you can keep the facts straight, maybe write them down yourself before you go into a meeting, I think that's fantastic. And
it's okay to own your feelings and say,
yeah,
when this person does that, it's making me feel this.
Mm-hmm.
But when it comes to the documentation part, that's the facts.
Right. And then you don't want to get confused and blow things out of proportion when you are doing that. And I think it's also important that two people, same situation, both of their facts can be correct.
Yeah, you can have two different convictions existing in the same room.
Right.
And the way that's possible is honoring everyone's values in the same room.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. That's fantastic.
No problem.
And then, so our last question, we'll do this briefly, and so we can have one audience question pop in. I want to know what your top 3 most important traits of an effective leader and an effective team member would be.
Okay, Sarah, over to you.
Yeah, so I think I have mentioned some of this in the last couple of questions. I think the 3 biggest, let's say, features you should have as a leader is the ability to differentiate from what's really happening to where you are in another person's perspective, that it's not the same and it doesn't have to be the same. Be able to self-actualize. Who am I? What do I need? What do I need to thrive? What are my core values? What is my history? What schemas are at play here? Be able to self-actualize and to integrate. So be able to take that self-actualization and be able to integrate it within the group so that everyone can exist within the same space and everyone can be empowered to bring their, let's say, superpowers on board.
Awesome. Thanks so much.
No problem.
Those are fantastic. Those are really good. I've been in a leadership position now for a long time, so I often think initially of that, and then I have to then wind the clock back to remember when I was a student. So from my recent history, I'd say my experience as a leader, and so the majority of people go into science do at some point want to be a leader, whether it's of a group, of a university, department, whatever. The most important thing I've found is responsibility, and that's what leaders really are. You don't have to be the best, you don't have to be the hardest working, you don't have to be the smartest, but it's about taking responsibility for the program or the work stream or the pipeline, and that's what separates a leader from other things. It's the ability to take responsibility for the integrity of the program, and that brings me to my second point: is integrity, is having a consistency of fairness, honesty, and treatment of all people. And that can only be shown. That can only be done through action. You can say, yes, I have integrity, put it on your bio, blah, blah, blah. But it's not for you. It's not your label. It's what other people think of you. You can only achieve that label in other people's eyes by showing that fairness. So you have integrity by being fair and honest with as many people as possible. And the final point of being a leader is also to keep everyone on mission. As a student, this actually links back to being a student. I don't want to break anyone's heart out there, but if you're going to do a PhD and stuff, there will be many days where you think, I'm going nowhere, and what am I doing, and what's going on, and even into postdoc, and even into PI and stuff. But the thing I work on the most when I'm dealing with people who are, let's say, disenfranchised or bored, or it's a dull day, is to enthuse them and say, look, what we're doing now might seem tiny, a grain of sand in the Sahara, but this grain of sand will eventually end up in this prize at the end of the line. It could be 20 years from now, but you'll be part of something in which we cured a disease. So understand that it is critical. Even a dull Thursday, a single Western blot could be a critical component in that discovery. Don't underestimate even the smallest action. So as far as being a team member, or being a student within a team, I think honesty, just like being a leader, is the most important thing. And often as a young scientist in a group, the worst thing that can happen is that someone does something and they're not honest about it. Someone makes a mistake and they're terrified to tell their boss because their boss would go, oh my goodness. I've done that a few times, and I've had to say, dude, you're going to have to give me 5 minutes while I just sit and fume for a few seconds, and then we get back on track so I don't blow my stack or anything like that. But it's important that I know. So being honest about why you love science, why you want to do it, and being honest about what you do with your supervisor, it will help you. It's not just a virtue, but it will actually help you develop as a person. Be honest about how you feel, be honest about what you do. And I think the other most important feature is perseverance. This is what I work on a day-to-day basis. I always use this phrase. I live on catchphrases and stuff. And my old boss would tell me, what's the difference between the good labs in the world and the great labs in the world? And he says the good labs have 2% success rate and the great labs have 3% success rate. And that's it. It's sad and true, but it's unless you're willing to deal with the downs.
Right.
Downs is just like bread and butter. You're going to deal with downs all the time. So enjoy your victories, but dealing with the downs. And so perseverance is the most important thing.
You have to be ready to pick your own head up and continue on.
Yeah, you have to realize that, and that's part of being honest.
Mm-hmm.
Why am
with
I doing
yourself,
this?
Right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
That's great. Those are some really important traits. And I think we have time for like one question. There's one question up here that says, so when you're extremely busy, but you want to maintain leadership, what is something that you can do to actually take the time, even if it's a short amount of time, to show that you're being a leader and communicate that down to your team members? Like some meeting, for example, or
Do you want to
whatever.
take that, Sarah? Or?
Yes, I guess I'm usually having quite a lot on my plate. So as I said, I was a director of engineering. I have my own business on the side. I have 3 children. I have a couple of dogs. And I'm asked very often, how do you do it all without like losing your shit? Sorry, I swear sometimes. For myself, it's about I usually pause. It's maybe something that other people like move like directly into and like do this and that. I'm very thoughtful about what my next step is going to be. So I pause and I reflect and I prioritize. And sometimes I remove things off of my plate which don't have the right priority. They're not contributing to the situation anymore. Maybe they're not as important anymore because I only have so much time and so much space. Part of my prioritization always is people. So I, for some reason, can always make time for that one-on-one with a report, no matter what is going on. I will stop and move something to the side. Maybe I won't write that report as in much detail as I thought I would before. It will be maybe 75%, but that's okay. It's always important to handle the situation right away because we were talking about conflict before. Conflict gets worse when time happens in the middle. You need to address it right away. You need to address people's emotions right away. You need to address situations right away. And just like my children, I will always stop and make time for them when they need it. So I think that's my trick for being able to manage it all is being good at stopping and reflecting on what's important. And again, what Stuart said about integrity, I know what my values are. I mean, I even have them all the time sitting in front of me. One of my ones here is reliability, as I mentioned before, and the 5th one is empathy. I cannot be a leader if I'm not stepping forward with integrity with regards to my values. And this is part of self-actualization. So it's just very important to make that time.
That's great. Yeah, I think being able to communicate that you will stop for your team members and listen to them is all they need to be like, they trust me, they are going to listen to me, and I can actually tell them what I need to and be heard.
And it's important to be present. That's
yes.
something which, especially when you're in the office or in the lab or something, you know, when you're like walking past someone and you're hurrying off to a meeting and somebody says something like to you on the way. Earlier, Sarah, when I was younger, would just be like, I'm in a hurry, I'm just running past it. Now I will stop and I will be mentally present because that meeting can wait 5 minutes. That presence and being fully there for someone goes so far. So be present.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much. Yeah, I think we're going to have to wrap up.
Okay.
But
Sorry.
Sorry,
I took your time,
we
Stuart.
have the next session
You
starting
hit the nail on
soonish.
the head. That was perfect.
But this was such a fun session, such a fun panel. The discussions we had were fantastic, and I hope it helped a lot of people that were listening or can listen back some other time. And I just want to thank you guys for coming here. It was nice to meet you virtually. And the next session will be occurring at 14:30 GMT, so in about 9 minutes from now. So quick little break for those of you on here, and then you can hop back on in about 9 minutes. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much for inviting
Okay, thank
and
you so
including
much.
me.
You a great panel chair. Thank
Yes.
you.
Thank
You
you.
are.
Great to meet you.
Bye.
Cheerio.
Bye.
Thank you so much, everyone. That was fantastic. So welcome back, everyone, and we will kick off straight away with our next talk. We are delighted to welcome Dr. Jazmine Benjamin, who is a postdoctoral research fellow at Vanderbilt University Medical Center. Jazmine will be talking about how to craft a statement of purpose when it comes to writing funding applications. So Jazmine, welcome, and please do take it away.
Yeah, Alice, thanks for having me. Hopefully everyone can hear me okay and see the slides. If not, just drop something in the chat and I'll make adjustments as needed. So thank you for the introduction and thank you for the invitation. I know this conference is kind of situated in the UK, but I am currently in Tennessee in the United States. So it's about 8:30 in the morning for me. So glad to kind of have this as something to do first thing in the day. So as the title suggests, I'll be talking to you about creating a statement of purpose for your funding applications. Obviously, there's so much more that goes into creating a complete application packet, but as it turns out, the statement of purpose is usually kind of a sticky point for a lot of people. So hopefully what I share today will be useful. And I know that having 3 letters behind my name doesn't necessarily convey that I am someone who is qualified to talk about this. And I'm probably not the most qualified person, but I do have a pretty extensive history of applying for funding opportunities. Those include opportunities in research. So here in the United States, one of our main funding bodies is the National Institutes of Health, and they offer a variety of funding opportunities from predoctoral all the way through to senior faculty. And so I've applied for the F31, which is a predoctoral research training fellowship. I've also applied for 2 F32s, both the predoctoral and postdoctoral ones. So the predoctoral one funded my last couple years of grad school, and the postdoctoral one is funding my first year of my postdoc. And so the training grants, the T32s, are really more of an institutional grant that's meant to support the training of a predoctoral or postdoctoral student, while kind of keeping things short term. So they usually don't go much longer than 2 years. I've also applied for funding through the American Heart Association and the National Science Foundation. There's also opportunities for professional development, so travel awards, micro grants, organizational and societal fellowships. And then I've also served on a number of admissions committees, including those at the graduate and undergraduate level. And I've also read through applications for summer experiences for students who are interested in research. So I have a good bit of experience with not just writing personal statements, but also reading them, engaging other people's kind of reactions to different kinds of things that are expressed in personal statements. So why are personal statements important? For starters, they set the stage for the rest of your application. Normally, the personal statement is one of the things that goes up front in your application. And that's because it gives the reviewers an idea of who you are, of what's important to you, of how well you can communicate. And those things are quite important and can be quite weighty in terms of whether or not you receive a funding opportunity. They also allow you to showcase your strengths, whether this is written communication, whether this is you letting them know that you've published 5 papers while you were in grad school, 5 first author publications. This allows you to kind of cherry pick the things that are most important to you and put those things on display front and center. It also allows you to explain the finer points of your experience. If you're an undergraduate who's applying for a funding opportunity and you had a semester where your grades slipped a little bit, just looking at your transcript, they might say, oh, this person isn't consistent in keeping high grades. But in your personal statement, you'd be able to kind of explain that I was really sick that semester, or I had mental health issues, and really kind of plead your case, if you will. And then lastly, it gives the reviewers insight into who you are prior to formal interviews. Some of these opportunities have kind of a multifactorial application process where you submit a paper application packet, they read through that, and then based on that, they'll move to a second round of application or second round of interviews in person. And so your personal statement can give them a little bit of insight into how you think and your personality before they meet you in person. So I split this talk into 5 points, and I understand I have 30 minutes, so I'll try to keep things really brief. The first thing is understanding the audience. And I think this is arguably one of the most important parts of creating your personal statement. So the first thing that you want to do is research the funding organization or the organizations that are available to you based on your field of research. Use your resources for this. I think one of the easiest ways is to just hop on Google or your preferred search engine and just type in funding opportunities in insert field here. You'll get a lot of stuff. You'll get the big funding bodies, perhaps the ones that are sponsored by the government, and then you'll also eventually get down to things that are a little bit more private in terms of funding. Those often have a little bit less extensive of an application process, but will likely still include a personal statement. A lot of universities here in the United States, particularly the research-intensive universities, have an Office of Research. A lot of those universities are really braggadocious about how much research funding they bring in. And so they have entire offices geared toward making sure that research funding continues to increase. So reaching out to your university's Office of Research, they are often more than happy to help you find opportunities, happy to help you put your application packet together because it makes their job easier and it helps research application and hopefully research funding numbers go up for the university. So utilize that resource as well. Lastly, second to lastly, your mentor or advisor will likely be the person who tells you what kind of opportunities to apply for. They usually have insight into kind of who's sitting on what committees to review these things, and they also likely have students who have applied for those things in the past. And lastly, ask your classmates. If you are part of a cohort of students coming into grad school and you're all interested in the same kind of research, ask your classmates, ask more senior students what opportunities they applied for and if they enjoyed them or didn't. Those are also very important questions to ask. But overall, just utilize your resources, utilize the people around you. And you then want to first search for pertinent details. So the first thing you want to look for is relevance to your work. I'm a scientist, so I am interested in hypertension. I would not apply for a funding opportunity that has to do with mass spectrometry. I don't know the first thing about it. So when I find one, the first thing I look at is to make sure that they are looking for someone who has either a broad or specific interest that's very close to mine. Next, look for due dates. I will not apply for anything that is anything less than 60 days away from being due. There's a lot more than the personal statement that goes into an application packet. Oftentimes it requires support from your PI, it requires other recommendation letters, and those things can take quite a while to get a hold of. So if it's less than 2 months out, I just kind of put that one aside. With that being said, you want to look at the frequency of application cycles. For things like the F-31, they have multiple application cycles a year, and they're around the same time every year. So perhaps this this opportunity that you're looking at is due in a month, but they have another application cycle opening up in 6 months. Don't be afraid if you have the time to just kind of delay. You would rather submit a fully prepared application that you're proud of in 6 months rather than just throwing something together in a month and then not getting funded anyway. Then lastly, any supplemental forms that might be available. Again, these may include letters of support from your PI, letters of support from an additional PI if you have more of a junior advisor. It can include other recommendation letters or even formal transcripts. So make sure that you're aware of those things so you can get a hold of them well before you need them. And then lastly, the application criteria. You want to make sure that you're qualified to be able to apply for that opportunity. If it's a postdoctoral fellowship as a predoctoral student, you can't really apply for that. So make sure that you're paying attention to those things as well. So next thing that you want to do is tailor your personal statement to the criteria. And this is something I usually create an outline of my personal statement up front and then work from there. So there are a couple things to consider. Firstly, the length. Should it be 2 pages? Should it be 1 page? Do I have an unlimited length? There's usually a length requirement because there are hundreds, if not thousands, of applications that a single study section or committee has to go through. So they try to keep the personal statements rather short. Consider formatting. Some want a very specific font and very specific margins. Pay attention to that stuff. That's a very quick way to get your application thrown out. Specific focal points. If you're applying for a research-specific funding opportunity, you will want to focus on your research. If you're applying for one that's more of a professional development opportunity, you may want to focus on your training or your educational background. So consider that as well. And in your statement, be prepared to address some basic questions. Firstly, what kind of work are you doing? Are you doing your PhD in history or fine arts? Are you doing more of a science or biomedical science? Be prepared to kind of explain what kind of work you're doing and also why it matters. I know for a lot of scientists, we're ultimately trying to cure a disease or make life easier for some group of people. For historians, it may be preserving history and making sure that past transgressions aren't repeated. But these are all important things to convey in your personal statement is why it's important. Why should the committee care about what it is that you're doing? And then lastly, you want to make sure that you convey why this opportunity is a good fit for you. Not just that, but why you're a good fit for this opportunity. A lot of these programs, particularly in terms of training grants, they have renewal periods. So every year or two, they have to resubmit to get more money for their training grants. And part of that submission packet to get more funding is showing these are the students that we funded, this is how successful they were, this is where they are now. So you want to convey that while this is a good fit for me, I'm a all A student, I got top marks on all my exams, I'm doing great. You also want to convey to them that I fit well here because I'm going to represent this funding opportunity well and you're going to be proud of me. So make sure that you consider and put time in to address those questions. So next thing is crafting a compelling narrative. And I usually am told to tell a story. But in my last appearance at a Hello Bio event, I kind of tweaked that a little bit into selling your story. At the end of the day, you're asking for money. In that event, you're really kind of selling something. You're giving a business pitch, so to speak. And so the first thing is to just get everything on paper. That's the most important part. And I'll touch on that a little bit in a couple slides. But you're going to be the PI for your grant. If you get an F31, you are the PI on that grant. So you need to sell your product and you also need to sell yourself. You need to make the study section or the review committee feel like this is the next best thing that's going to happen in your given field. You need to aim for a strong opening statement, and I'll talk in the next couple slides about how to do that. Define your terms, especially I see this happen a lot in things like immunology, where there's a lot of abbreviations for things that people just kind of throw them in like seasoning, and they don't necessarily take time to explain what those things are. That becomes very overwhelming very quickly, and it's a surefire way to get your application thrown out. Then also have a clear idea of what the ultimate payoff of your research is. Especially in the sciences, not everything is going to cure something. Sometimes it's that we're creating something that's going to lead to a pharmaceutical therapy that's going to be helpful. Sometimes it's just improving the quality of life for someone with a terminal illness. So have a clear idea of what your research is ultimately going to go toward and be very specific about that. And then, as I said before, consider why the organization should invest in you and why it would benefit them. So next we'll go into the key components of a personal statement. If you've written any kind of report before, then this is probably pretty cut and dry for you. It's an introduction, body, conclusion. So for your introduction, as I said before, you want to aim for a strong opening statement. You want to hook the reviewers early. Consider that your application might be the 100th one that they're reading that day, and they're probably tired and they just want to get through that last one and go have a beer and watch TV. So you want to hook them early. You want to avoid cliche starts. In my time on admissions committees, I could almost boil it down to one of these four things. Since I was a child, I've always been interested in science, or I've always been interested in history. Fire-related metaphors are very popular, so I've always had a burning desire to do this, or this sparked my interest in science. For those, I would recommend getting out a thesaurus and finding another way to convey your passion. Direct interactions, these are probably my least favorite. These are, I'm applying for this funding opportunity because blah, blah, blah. Zero creativity, kind of shows that this is really more perhaps you're checking a box than anything else. Even if you're not, that's how it comes off. And then next is quotes. Usually they're not really related to whatever your story is. Perhaps you didn't know what else to start your story with, so you went with a quote. So I always tell people to avoid these cliche starts unless you're telling a very vivid story. So as opposed to, since I was a child, I've always been interested in science, or I really enjoy studying science. You might instead say, I've always enjoyed the thrill of discovery. And I vividly remember spending hours as a kindergartner trying to learn some obscure language or what have you. That gives a little bit more color to your language. And it also, it's different than just saying, I've always been interested in this since I was a child. The thrill of discovery is a way that conveys your passion as well. And I've always told people to consider something called a circular narrative. This is probably one of my favorite things that I don't see often in personal statements. And that is literally introducing a scenario at the beginning of your personal statement. So perhaps saying, I've always enjoyed the thrill of discovery. I remember spending hours as a kindergartner with my grandparents, looking at trees, blah, blah, blah. And then at the end, bringing your conclusion back to whatever it was you introduced at the beginning. Perhaps, you're applying for a botany opportunity and you say, with my research, I'll be able to make sure that there are plenty of trees for future children to look at with their grandparents. That kind of connecting the end to the beginning is not something that we see very often. It's a really great way to tell and sell your story. And then my last tip is to just write your main content first, write the body of your application, and then return to the introduction last. Sometimes you get good ideas about how to start by focusing on something else. So in the body of your statement, you're going to explain and again, sell yourself. You want to showcase your relevant experience, whether that is your research, your educational background, your accomplishments. You want to give plenty of evidence supporting your fitness for this specific opportunity. And in that, you want to be specific. What will this opportunity offer you? Will it offer you a chance to explore a research question that's been burning in your mind? Will it give you the chance to participate in a professional development opportunity that's not offered at your university that no one else has done? Those are things that you need to be very specific about. And you also need to be specific, especially if you're doing a research related application, how you're qualified to study your question. Is your lab the only one in the world that has this specific technique? Was your lab the one that discovered this particular artifact in a church somewhere and you are the only person that can do this? You need to tell them why they need to fund you because no one else can do this. And then in your conclusion, you're going to express the impact of the opportunity. And again, go with that circular narrative, tie it back to your introduction. And then think ahead. Include future goals for yourself or for your research. If it's a professional development opportunity, express how that's going to help you have a successful career in your given field. If it's for your research, explain how you plan on taking this research with you to your next level, whether that's a doctoral degree or postdoc. Even if you're not going to do those things, it shows that you're really thinking ahead about this investment. And then express again how this opportunity will make those goals a reality. Will it give you time and money to chase that research question? Will it allow you that professional development opportunity? Think ahead about those things and say them very explicitly. So next thing is to address some common challenges, and I'll keep this pretty brief. First thing is writer's block. I think we've all been kind of assaulted by this, and Usually writer's block turns into procrastination. So my first and most important piece of advice is to start early and write often. So if I have a application that's due in 3 months, I'm going to start writing today. And I'm going to start with maybe 5 minutes today. Maybe I just open a document and save it. And then tomorrow, maybe I'll write for 30 minutes. Over the weekend, I might write for an hour. But by the time I get through about a month, I will have a really good working draft of my personal statement that I feel comfortable with. And that's much easier than waiting until the last minute and just word vomiting on a piece of paper and hoping for the best. With that being said, a good draft is a done draft. The best thing you can do is just get it done and move on to getting feedback on it. With that said, save every draft before you make changes. This has happened to me so much, especially in graduate school, that I would write a draft. My PI would say, oh, take this paragraph out. I take the paragraph out. 5 drafts later, he says, oh, you had a paragraph before about XYZ. And I had deleted that file. I cannot remember what I said. So now I save every single draft so that when that happens, I'm like, no problem. Go back to that first draft, copy that, paste it into the new draft, and save myself plenty of time in English. In that, I also use what I call a trash file or a dump file. This is just a giant file that I have on Google. I think it's Google Docs. It's probably about 50 pages now. And it is literally just things that maybe I word vomited and it makes no sense to me at that moment. And I take it out of that document, I put it into the trash file. And months down the road, when I'm writing a paper or something, I may be looking for a specific citation or something like that. I can go back to that trash file, kind of scroll through and find what it is that I'm looking for. And so I have a bunch of stuff in there. I have previous personal statements. I have paragraphs that didn't make it into my dissertation. I have all sorts of things in that file. You never know when they're going to be useful. So I just dump everything there and I'll come back to it if I need it in the future. The next thing is kind of something that I do personally. I have a very strong internal dialogue, and I'm just now learning that some people don't have that. So if you don't have that, don't do this. But write in a stream of consciousness. For me, I genuinely will write as it comes to my mind. So I may say, you know, hypertension is one of the top 10 causes of mortality globally, and I'll ... insert a citation about this here, ... So that kind of thing, where I'm really kind of having a conversation with myself, and then I'll go back and I'll insert that citation or what have you. So I leave myself notes as I go. The next thing is to abandon perfectionism. It's never going to be perfect. You're going to submit it, and then you're going to say, oh, I should have said this. I should have talked about this opportunity. It's never going to be perfect, especially if it's a first draft. The most important thing is to just get it on paper. The next thing is to find a writing group. So if you're someone who performs well in front of others in terms of being at a coffee shop or a library, find a virtual or an in-person writing group and have some accountability for yourself and help yourself to be accountable for others. That's one of the really great ways, great things about, I guess, the new virtual age that we're in, is that you can hop on a Zoom call with someone and not say a word and get 5 pages written just because you have someone else that's kind of staring at you. And then lastly is to walk away from it, but come back. I find that when I'm writing, I may write for an hour and then I'll go take a walk for an hour. And on that walk, some magical connection between two things will come to me because I'm not actively thinking about it. Take time away from your writing. Write for 10 minutes and then take a 20-minute walk or read a book for 20 minutes. Do something else where you're not actively thinking about that. You'll be surprised at how quickly some ideas will come to you. The next thing is balancing confidence and humility. And I know I'm kind of getting to the end of my time here, so I may skip a couple things at the end. But I think this one's important because when we're applying for applications, obviously we want to talk about our strengths. We want to talk about the awards we've gotten, the papers we've published, all this good stuff that we've done, how we are just the apex predator in terms of our academic achievements. But you don't want to be a braggart, right? So you want to contextualize your experiences. If you say, I got this award for doing XYZ, you want to contextualize that award. I was a graduate student. this project was very important to me, and so I was really proud to win this award given how much time I put into that project. You want to show, don't tell. Some of these applications will require you to submit your CV also. In that case, you don't need to list everything that you've done. They'll look at your CV. You need to pick out the things that are most important that you have really salient memories of and include those things in your personal statement. You'll be able to talk about them with a little more vigor, but you'll also there'll be things that you're proud of, and that's really what's important. You want to emphasize your effort. If one of your papers won a cover on a magazine, you want to talk about how involved you were in that process. I edited the manuscript, or I wrote the manuscript, or I contributed to figures. Be very specific about what your role was in any given effort. Don't compare yourself to others. Something I really don't like in personal statements is when people say, you know, I won this award and that put me among the 1% of students that blah, blah, blah. We don't really care about the percentage. What's important is that you won the award and hopefully you worked hard for it and hopefully it's a proud moment for you. Don't compare yourself to others. That comes off as being a little bit haughty. Celebrate others. I've seen in a couple of applications that people will say that they've won an award or on a co-author, co-first author paper, and they will give a little bit of honor to the person that they won it with. So they'll say, you know, I won this with another grad student and it was a really great team effort. That's really important. It shows that you're able to work in a team, you're quite humble, and you're also not afraid to give other people their flowers when necessary. Say the word because. For some reason, people don't do this. There is a 1978 study, I think the author was Ellen Langer, that found that when people use the word because to explain something, that others are more likely to respond positively. Something about, I guess, the casualness of it, and often a more formal type of application process makes things a little bit more personable. So don't be afraid to use because and to link your thoughts together in that way. And lastly, it's not all about you. Your personal statement is personal, obviously, but there are other things that you're also going to have to address. If you, again, have had joint efforts on things, you'll want to talk about the teamwork aspect of it. You are part of a lab group. You're not an island. So consider that it's not always all about you, and that there's going to be the involvement of others, and you'll need to address that. With my last 2 minutes, I will very quickly go through quick tips for editing and refining your personal statement. So ask for review help early and be very selective in who you ask. Don't go and ask someone who doesn't have time to do it. Get someone with no knowledge of your field to look at it, someone who's never done what you've done before, and make sure that if they understand it, you're probably in the clear. Be very clear on what feedback you need. Sometimes when I would give my PI a piece of writing, I'd say, can you help me cut out 100 words from this? Or can you look at the introduction? I'm not sure about if that makes sense. And then lastly, and most importantly, don't take it personally. If you're asking for a critique, people oftentimes are not trying to be malicious. They genuinely want you to have the best possible product for your application. So if you get it back and it's covered in red, take a moment and seethe about it, and then go and address all of those things, and you'll be much better for it. Read it aloud. Sounds weird. You'll pick up on so much more if you read it aloud. Make sure that you're minding your word and character count. A lot of these have a length requirement. Don't go over that. And then lastly, I recommend using a proofreading software. One of my favorites is Grammarly. You can literally copy and paste your document in there, and it will give you all kinds of grammatical and stylistic tips that you're more than welcome to accept or decline. And I'll skip over the do's and don'ts. The most important thing here is to start early, be patient, don't strive for perfection, and lastly, don't worry about it. Everything will be fine. You'll have other opportunities, whether you receive this funding opportunity or not, to apply again. And every time that you apply, you learn something. You get feedback from people who have read your work and looked at your entire packet, and you can use that to be better each time. So hopefully that was helpful, and I am more than happy to chat with people. Here's how you can get a hold of me. The best way is probably my website at the bottom. Um, and I wish everyone the best on their future applications. I know you'll all find success in one way or another. And thank you again for having me.
Thank you so much, Jazmine. That was such a detailed and thorough presentation. That was absolutely brilliant. My background is in writing, and I learned a lot from that presentation. So that's fantastic. We've got a couple of very, very quick questions before we get on our panel that I'd really like to ask that have come up in the chat.
Sure.
The first one is, it seems that this advice could be transposed to funding applications in different parts of the world, i.e. outside the US. So is that, would you say that's the case as well? This isn't US centric advice. This is actually pretty universal advice when it comes to writing funding applications.
Absolutely. Yeah, I knew that, this is includes some of my friends across the pond. And so this is totally global advice for all fields in all locations.
Fantastic. And then just finally, someone's asked, can you use ChatGPT to give you the basis of your applications, or is that a big no-no?
Actually, I just was in a talk about this, about using ChatGPT ethically. Obviously, you don't use ChatGPT to write your personal statement for you, but you can use it. For example, an example prompt would be, give me an outline for a personal statement for a NIH fellowship focused on mass spectrometry, and it will give you an outline. I've done that more often than I care to admit, and it's extremely helpful. So yes, I would say use ChatGPT ethically. Don't use it to write for you, but use it to help you with the creative process.
Fantastic. That's brilliant. Thank you so much, Jazmine. That was absolutely brilliant. And you've sparked a lot of discussion in the chat. So hopefully in between your experiments, you can go into the chat and just see what everyone's been saying, because that was, yeah, a lot of people found that very helpful. So thank you very much.
Thank you again for having me.
Our next panel is on academic versus non-academic science careers and how to choose the right path. This panel will be hosted by Samuel Dada, PhD student at the University of Cambridge, with guests Danielle Tomasello, founder of The Social Scientist, and Pedro Resende, co-founder of Chaperone. So Sam, Pedro, and Danielle, please do put on your videos, take yourselves off mute, and Sam, over to you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for the warm welcome, Alice. Hope you guys are all enjoying the Hello Bio LabLife Conference so far. Like Alice said, I'm going to be chairing this next panel discussion on identifying your next career steps, which is essentially, to me, the battle between staying in academia or going elsewhere and looking at non-academic science careers. I'm joined by, Pedro Resende and Danielle Tomasello, and I'm in a place and a position in my life where I'm currently in my final year of my PhD in chemistry in the department at University of Cambridge, and I'm currently exploring what career options I should take. So I'm really excited for the conversation that we're going to be having today with this well-esteemed scientist, and I can't wait to find out and maybe even get some insight as to whether I'm making the right career decisions or not. So I would like the first panelist, Pedro, to kind of give a brief introduction about his career and how he's been able to navigate to where he is right now.
Hi, Sam, and hi, everyone in the meeting. It has been an amazing meeting so far. I've been following it, and congrats on the organization of this. Well, I'm from Portugal. I'm a biologist. I'm celebrating 20 years of my career this year. 10 years as a non-PhD and 10 years after my PhD. So I've had many different roles in academia and outside of academia. As an academic researcher, I now lead my independent line of research in stem cell biology at I3S Porto. And outside of academia, I work in the pharmaceutical industry at Pfizer. I worked as external consultant for the Ministry of Health for the areas of innovation here in Portugal. I worked in companies of science communication and outreach. And more recently, I'm an entrepreneur. I'm co-founder and director of Chaperon, which is a company that provides career development for scientists. And I'm a proud father of a 2-year-old baby. It's a big part of my life now.
Oh, wow, that's absolutely amazing, absolutely incredible. It shows that there's so much more around there, and you can also kind of combine both, academic and non-academic careers together. Danielle, do you mind introducing yourself and also, your journey and, your career right now, and what you're currently doing?
Yeah, hi, everyone. Thank you, Sam. I'm really excited to be here today. So I am a postdoc at the Whitehead Institute, which is part of MIT here in Massachusetts. And I have been a postdoc now for close to 6.5 years. So been here for quite a bit. And back in 2018, I started The Social Scientist, which is a nonprofit STEM platform for one-on-one mentorship. So my background is the neuroscience field. I'm really interested in utilizing human stem cells to model different neurodevelopmental disorders. But I really, truly have such a passion for mentorship. And I hope to essentially give everyone across the globe access to very enthusiastic and passionate mentors to help with all of their career aspects in the STEM field.
Wow, absolutely stunning. Thank you so much, both, for your brief introduction. And we're going to get cracking into the questions and the part where everyone wants to know about. So I'm going to go first with Danielle. How do you identify whether an academic career is right for you?
My personal opinion is you don't. I think that you should give it a try. So this was something I struggled with for quite a while. I wanted to know what I wanted to do, and having uncertainty really stressed me out. But I remember after talking, and a couple of people mentioned this, after talking to a couple of academic professors, they said that they wanted to give academia a try, as opposed to what you do, what you apply to an academic position, and that's where you're at for the rest of your life. And I think that kind of opens my mind to, wow, well, this is just an avenue that I can take and see if I like it. If I'm not happy with it, there's absolutely no reason to stay in the field. So I have a number of friends that have left academia and are much happier in biotech or science communication. And I have plenty of friends that are in academia and they absolutely love it. So I think there's so many aspects that contribute to how your career goes and how happy you are in your career. So say, for instance, you are in a department where you just really don't get along with the chair, and there are just some factors that just don't overall help with how your career prospect is going. So maybe it's better to switch to a different university, go to a different department. But I think that you try your best. If you are really interested in academia, do your best, do a great postdoc, try to hit all of those hallmarks that academia is trying to look for, such as getting fellowships, being independent, publications, and give it a try.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you. I think that's quite a reasonable thing, because I think that's something I'm kind of battling with, because I love the kind of the freedom and flexibility academia gives me. However, I guess a lack of structure is something I really crave for at the same time. So it's kind of that battle between what I want and what other places has to offer as well. But Pedro, I know you're kind of, you're basically dabbling between so many different things. It will be great to get your insight on these questions, knowing whether, to stay in academia, or if there's a way of having a both, or maybe a combination of both, like you clearly are having.
Yes, I think the short and easy answer is by being informed. So you need to make informed decisions. But if we dig into this, like how can you get informed? Well, I would recommend you talk to people who have opted to stay in academia, and obviously people who have left. Ideally, that have made this decision like recently, not like 15 years ago, because then the context and might have changed, and you might receiving information that is outdated. So that's an important step to being informed. I think you should get advice from like people who are experienced in careers. In my role, I must be an advocate for this. Talk to career counselors, career coaches, career advisors, talk to supervisors, talk to mentors. These are all like relevant stakeholders in the career field that can help you with this question. And also experiment. That's something that I've done very early on in my career. And before career, like 10 years ago, careers were much more stable. Now they are super dynamic. Now people should, rather than like do career planning, people should do career prototyping. They should expose themselves like to different short experience in different fields and learn from that. Like if, because some roles they might seem like ideal from you, but once you've tried them out, you might get a different feeling from that experience. So prototyping early on in your career is key. So think long term. I know that in the short term this might have an impact because you're experimenting, you're not progressing as fast, but in the long term it will be super useful.
Wonderful. I think that's definitely a very good idea and an answer. That's something I've tried to do as well, because a lot of places, and I think a lot of PhD programs do have the ability for you to do maybe an internships. For example, I'm on the BBSRC DTP in the UK, and we have that ability of having an industrial placement. So this gives you the opportunity to see what's kind of out there. Because I guess most people, when you're doing a PhD, you're already in the academic sphere. So, you know, exploring what's out there and seeing whether actually, you know, is that suited to me or not, could be a great way of experimenting. And doing that is definitely perfect kind of stepping stone to making those crucial decisions in the long term. So in terms of exploring, you know, when you were in this position, how did you go about, you know, researching and actually looking, apart from obviously asking people, knowing, you know, what's the right path for you? How did you go about that? You know, did you go about it in terms of a systematic way where you looked at, okay, this is what I want from life? Or did you go about it and just saying, oh, this is what I currently enjoy? Or did you just go about it by just grabbing any opportunities that kind of came around your way? How did you kind of navigate around this space, Danielle?
So just navigating, going like into academia in general?
Yes.
Or?
Yes.
Okay.
How did you decide, like, was it just something that you were like, okay, I'm staying right here? Or were you able to kind of explore things beforehand?
Yes. So I did my PhD in the pain field, and this was my first time in the neuroscience field. Absolutely loved it, and I knew I wanted to continue in the neuroscience field. But the pain field was particularly difficult for me, just utilizing mouse models and having pain models. It was really hard. So I knew I wanted to stay in neuroscience, and I was very interested in human stem cell research. And I knew that no matter where I went afterwards, that having a background with stem cell research would be beneficial for my career. And so that was like one main reason for why I wanted to do a postdoc. So just I generally looked for postdocs in any areas of interest for me in neuroscience. And then I ended up with, you know, a postdoc and working with neurodevelopment, but I could have very easily done a postdoc in many other fields in the neuroscience. So ultimately, this was a good career move for me. I also was very interested in coming to Boston just because there are so many opportunities here. So it just made the most sense for what I wanted to do.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Pedro, I know that you were talking about, you know, exploring, you know, other things. How did you go about that? Exploring other kind of careers and potentials before deciding what route to take?
I think exploration is super important, and I think I've done it in many different ways. I use the advice that I mentioned from different people that I've talked to. I obviously use LinkedIn as well. Like LinkedIn is a very useful tool for this kind of like research, and I kind of had this mindset of not worrying too much, at least early on in my career, whether that was like the best. Well, I'm not gonna say the best, but like the ideal decision or not. I was not afraid to experiment. So that gave me freedom in terms of what path to choose. But also like I was surfing the wave, you know, like whatever came into my encounter in terms of options, I said, okay, let's do this. It seems to make sense, and then digest things only after having the real experiment, like not thinking too much. I think that was kind of like the approach I had early on in my career.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you for that. So what would you say are your top tips for, early career scientists who are looking to maybe transition from academia to the professional world? What would you say would be your top tips for them, Pedro?
Well, I often get the question of what are the three meta skills I think are more important for me, and these are like, I think number one, health and well-being. It's often neglected, but I've seen so many colleagues of mine who are like excellent professionals, great potential, having a very negative impact on their careers just because they neglect their health and well-being. Is so common in academia, so common in academia. Like 2 out of 5 academics suffer from depression, for example, in throughout their careers. So health and well-being skills is something that we all should develop. That having a growth mindset, I think it's super important. Like you need to be constantly willing to improve yourself, reskilling, upskilling, but also having this mentality of like, if you embrace a project or if you join a team, you want that team to be better with you. And when you leave, you want that team to be better than when you started. So having this growth mindset of you constantly growing in whatever team and project you're growing, it needs to be better. It's also super useful. And then lastly, I know it was mentioned here before in other talks, empathy. I think empathy is the basis for many things, including learning. Like if you're empathetic, like you'll be an active listener. You'll be an efficient networker. You'll be an efficient learner. And for me, it's very hard to imagine someone who is good on health and well-being, has growth mindset, and has empathy skills that is not a successful professional. If you combine these three, but if you miss one of these, it's enough.
Thank you so much for that insight.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Danielle, in terms of obviously people who are looking at transitioning from, from one academic kind of career in terms of topics to a different topic, totally, because that's something that you've been able to do. How do you go about it? Because sometimes in academia, you're sometimes just kind of boxed in, especially when you've done a PhD, you're doing this project and everyone just expects you to want to delve in more into that specific topic. So how do you transition? How have you been able to do that? And what advice would you give people?
Yeah, absolutely. So postdoc life is definitely different from a PhD life, and it can be very isolating. During your PhD or your master's, you come in as a cohort with your students and you all work together and you all know what's going on in different labs. But as a postdoc, it can definitely be isolating. So going to opportunities, doing career event opportunities is very helpful. And honestly, try to be a tiny bit extroverted and get to know other people in different labs, because they can always collaborate or help you out. But I would say that looking for other opportunities, doing something like the Hello Bio LabLife Conference is awesome, because you get exposure to different career opportunities and awesome advice from all of the invited panelists. And I also think that you can look for other opportunities. So for instance, I have a friend that he was really interested in industry, but he was having a hard time going straight from a PhD. So what he ended up doing was a postdoc in industry. So even though he was, making a bit less than he would if he was like a scientist at the company, he then, after he finished a very quick postdoc there, he then like climbed up the ladder so much more than if he were to have gone there directly. So that's definitely an opportunity that was great for him, because he was also able to publish papers. So he was just able to kind of somewhat continue a slightly academic lifestyle, but in opportunity, and then it really increased his career prospects. And then I think for like other career prospects, for instance, if you're interested in science communication, what was really great is that you can pitch articles or pitch, small little synopsis to different journals or to news outlets. And that's what I did with The Social Scientist. When I created it, I reached out to, Nature, I reached out to Scientific American. I said, hey, I have this like awesome new platform. Can I write about it? And they're like, absolutely. But you don't have to, do something so big. You can also write about what career, what you think career opportunities are as a postdoc. You can write about anything. So there are always opportunities to write, which I think is great. Other things such as looking for certifications or taking additional courses, like for instance, MIT is on edX, which is a great way to increase a couple of courses that you're interested in, or certifications such as data science is really big. It's kind of becoming almost indisposable in the life science field and bioinformatics, so having that background is great. And then additionally, I would just recommend having really great mentors or collaborators that can provide those letter recommendations for when you do want to transition out.
Oh, wonderful. That leads into one of the questions from someone in the audience who says, what do you think, how important do you think having a good mentor is in helping in choosing the right career path? And I know that's something you do as well with the social scientist.
Yeah, I honestly think it's indispensable. I would not be where I am today without the great mentors that I had. And that was honestly the reason I created The Social Scientist. I reached out to those same people that have helped me in my career, and those became the first mentors that I had on my platform. And then ultimately it grew from there. But I think that it really is indispensable. I've gotten so much great career advice that I could not have done otherwise.
Wonderful, thank you. And Pedro, in terms of being able to navigate, especially into like policy, which I've seen that you've been working on, how can a student, for example, who wants to get involved in something like that, do that from such an early starting point?
Well, you can look for think tanks. I think think tanks, we have a lot of these days, and they are open for applications from different people, from different backgrounds, from like scientists, engineers, any kind of like background. Like and think tanks are a great way like to meet people that work or at least are interested in working in public policies. And go from there. Like start talking to people who are in there. Probably they will have guests in the events they organize. There are people who like are already committed in working in that area, and talk with them. Yeah, I think that would be my first option to start with think tanks, and go from there.
Wonderful. I guess the general aspect of this is like just grabbing every opportunity, enhancing your skills, and just building that up constantly and improving yourself, because I guess, the world is evolving and you need to always equip yourself with all those skills so you can literally have the choice of dabbling whether you want to go into academia or stay in academia, or go into industry or even non-academic or scientific careers in general. So before we end this session, I just wanted to just take one last bit of your input, and wanted to ask both of you, what are your top 3 professional skills you think every life scientist should develop?
Should I go, Sam?
Yes.
So I would say that the absolute top skill that absolutely none of us are taught is management. I remember just recently I asked my mentor, she was my PI when I was a technician long ago, and she's kind of become a very close friend of mine. I said, what has been the hardest thing about academia? And she said, it's not about grant writing, it's not about papers, it has everything to do with managing her team. That has been the hardest thing. So learn management skills, learn how to individualize management based on the person's needs and kind of how best they would respond. I would say multitasking is very important, and figuring out how to prioritize what's very necessary at that moment, and trying not to get too bogged down with how much you're going to endure. And then last, writing. I think that Jazmine did such a great job with tips for writing, and I think that no matter what field you go into, being able to communicate your science and being able to do quick elevator pitches about your work is just very important overall.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that insight, Danielle. Pedro, do you have any take on this as well? What are your top 3 professional skills you think every life scientist should develop?
Well, in addition to the ones I previously mentioned, and to the ones Danielle pointed out, which I was hearing and thinking, well, I'm left out of options because she was kind of picking the ones I was going to pick. But I will try to have 1 or 2. I think networking is a skill in itself, and it's super useful. And I would add negotiation as well, on not in the more formal sense of it, but you always negotiate different things with your supervisor, with whether you're arguing in a rebuttal letter in a paper that you submit, you're negotiating. So that's a useful skill also to have for career progression. I would add those 2 in addition to all the other ones, which I think are super important.
Wonderful. That's very insightful. Thank you so much. I would like to add just one last one. I think that I found that has been very important in terms of career progression as I've kind of gone through my academic career, is the ability to collaborate with people. I think that's something that sometimes is neglected, especially when we're in this kind of PhD sphere where we're taught about, the acts of independence and working by yourself and all of that we forget that, when we're looking into science or even looking into diseases, it's so important to collaborate and get some insights from other people and work together towards that common goal. So I think that's also one of the most crucial one. And, the act of collaboration, you can apply to any single, workplace you find yourself in. It's not just in academia, it's literally anywhere you go. But yeah, thank you so much, Pedro and Danielle, for your insights and for your contribution towards identifying your next career steps. I found this so insightful and so useful. And I think, I guess this has made my decision a little bit harder since the arguments have been very, very fair. But thank you so much for everyone who's attended the session. We'll now have a 15-minute break. And I guess the panelists will be staying back to answer any questions in the chat. But we'll be back at 3:45, where we'll get a talk into getting your writing published by Bronwen Martin from the University of Antwerp. Thank you so much, guys, for joining the session. I'll leave it to Alice to round it up.
Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Danielle, Pedro, and Sam. That was super, super helpful. And there have been a number of questions in the chat as well. So Danielle, Pedro, if you are able to just hang on for a little bit and just come back on some of those questions in the chat, that would be absolutely amazing. And we will, for those of you watching on the recording, we will be capturing everything that's been in the chat, any kind of hot topics for discussion, and we will be using that to create some more content for our blog, which is, so your questions, your comments are super helpful. So thank you so much, everyone. We will take another 15-minute break, as Sam said, and we will be back at 3:45 with Bronwen's talk on getting your writing published. Thank you so much. Our penultimate talk of the day is from Dr. Bronwen Martin. We'll hand over to her in a moment after a brief introduction. So Bronwen Martin is a scientific editor and research, communication and outreach coordinator in the Faculty of Pharmaceutical, Biomedical and Veterinary Sciences at the University of Antwerp. Bronwen will be talking about ways that you can get your scientific writing published. So over to you, Bronwen.
That's great. Thank you very much. I hope you can see my slides okay. Thanks everyone for joining the conference. I must say I've learned a tremendous amount already. It's been very informative and I've really enjoyed it. Also a special thank you to the Hello Bio team for organizing so many useful resources for researchers. So my name is Bronwen Martin. I work at the University of Antwerp in Belgium. For those of you maybe not very familiar with Antwerp, Antwerp is a relatively small city in Belgium, and it's famous for chocolate, beer and diamonds. So it's quite a fun place to visit if you've never been. And today I'm going to be taking you through some diverse writing outlets that can really help you to enhance the reach and influence of your work. So researchers spend a lot of their time doing research and collecting data, and the main way of communicating this data is through scientific papers. And obviously scientific papers play a crucial role in disseminating data, and they're very important for career progression and have lots of pros for disseminating data. But there are also some drawbacks to only communicating your research through scientific papers. And what are these drawbacks? Some of these drawbacks include paywalls. So a lot of your research data will be stuck behind a paywall, so people would have to pay to view your findings. Often the research papers are written in very technical language with quite a lot of jargon, so only really other researchers, or even only other researchers within your field, would likely understand what's written in those papers. And therefore, these research papers tend to have a limited reach, and that reach tends to be mainly other researchers working in your field. So why should we explore diverse writing outlets? Simply put, it's basically about expanding the reach and impact of your work. So basically what you're trying to do is you're trying to reach a much broader audience. And this audience can range from researchers out of your field, policymakers, companies. Perhaps you're looking to start up a collaboration with a company or get funding from a company. So you want to really sort of get your research out there so that the company can sort of know what you're working on. Students, perhaps you work at a university and you want to try and recruit students or PhD students to come to your university. Funding agencies, perhaps you want to really show funding agencies what it is that you're working on and how you're using the funds, etc. Venture capitalists, healthcare professionals and patients, that's an important one. Often there'll be healthcare professionals working in hospitals that might not have access to your latest findings, and it would really help if they could find it. And just the general public. And also what it does is it enhances visibility of your work. So you really then have an opportunity to showcase your expertise and to create connections and collaborations beyond your academic circles. And as we saw from Elodie's talk right at the beginning, creating these connections is actually a very important part of being a scientist, and using diverse writing outlets is basically also another way of making these connections. So then the question is, which types of writing outlets are there? So there are many different types of writing outlets. So for example, there is social media, for example, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram. Then there are blogs, there is the popular press, there are magazines, and books, for example. So there are many different types of writing outlets to choose from. And what I'll do is I'll take you through some general sort of writing tips for each of these outlets and how you can try and hone your writing for these different writing outlets. So before we go into each of the specific writing outlets, what I'd like to try and do is just give you some very general science writing tips. These are general science writing tips that can really be used in all types of writing outlets. And they also sort of feed forward from what the tips that Jazmine really sort of nicely detailed in her presentation. And this is sort of just another format of those. So when you start writing for a more of a popular science writing outlet, one of the first things that you need to do is you need to sort of spark curiosity. So you want people to be interested in what it is that you have to say. What is your message? So really think about your title. For example, if you're writing a blog article, think about a catchy title, because you really want to draw in people into what it is that you have to say. So spend a bit of time thinking about what it is that you want to say and then come up with a catchy title. Yes, keep it simple. That's often something that scientists struggle with. They'll often make things overly complicated. Then try and tell a story. People are interested in who you are as a scientist. Why did you become interested in the topic that you're studying? So use examples. For example, if you're studying the genetic factors that determine aging in a population in Italy, tell that story. Talk about the people that you're studying in Italy and what it's like to live there, and make it personal and why you're interested in that research. Use short sentences. This is often something that a lot of researchers tend to sort of forget, and they tend to have like really long sentences with lots and lots of commas in between. And by the time you get to the end of the sentence, you think, oh, what is this sentence? So use short sentences, break things down into short paragraphs, and use headings, because that really makes things a lot easier to read and to digest. Also, don't forget people are busy, so when they're reading these popular science articles, perhaps it's in the evening or after work, so you don't want to overload people with too much information. Also add quotes. For example, pull out a quote where you say, oh, I really enjoyed my internship in Italy because I learned completely different techniques. So don't be afraid to add in a quote. And then one thing that's very important is to use good quality visuals. So really take the time to take some good photos or find the nice image. Perhaps you have a fancy confocal image, but really sort of choose something that is going to catch people's eye, because often that will be the first thing that people will look at. They'll say, oh, there's a nice picture, photo. What is this? I'd like to learn more about this topic. So often what you'll see is researchers will sort of put like quite a technical or graphical image. Try and avoid that and have something that's good quality and immediately sparks curiosity in people. Try and make your content shareable via social media, because then what you do is you enable your content to be shared across different platforms and seen by many different people. And also for blogs, and this is also something that Elodie actually mentioned in her talk, is add in a little bit of information about yourself at the end of the blog. Who are you? How can people contact you? Because don't forget, a lot of this is about networking. So make sure that there's a little bit of information about you, where you are, and how people can get in touch with you. Because perhaps they'll read your article and think, oh, I have a question, or I'd like to collaborate with this person. So make sure that it's easy for them to know who you are and how to contact you. So social media is a good place to start because it has a very wide reach and the platforms are free to use. There are many different social media platforms to choose from. So then often it can be a bit overwhelming because then you think, okay, where do I start? So then the first thing to do is to really identify if there's a specific audience that you specifically want to reach. So let's say that you are interested in collaborating together with a company or that you need help from a company to sort of like bring your research together. Then, for example, LinkedIn would be a good place to start because there's lots of companies on LinkedIn. If you say, well, I'd like to try and engage with policymakers and I'd like to sort of try and engage with other researchers, then I would say that Twitter would be a good place to start. If you have nice images and you enjoy taking photographs and you do a lot of research that produces a lot of nice images, then Instagram is a perfect place to start because Instagram is very focused on images with very short pieces of text. The nice thing about Instagram is it's owned by the same group, so Meta, so Instagram and Facebook are part of the same platform. So if you post something on Instagram, then you can also automatically put it on Facebook. So you sort of hit two audiences at the same time. Now for social media, these are just some very general tips. I don't have time to go into great detail, but for the writing style, a couple of tips that you need to remember. First of all, brevity is key. You really don't want to be writing long texts for social media. So you really want to write short, impactful posts where you convey one idea in one post. Try and use hashtags because that will increase your discoverability. So for example, if you work in the aging field, make sure that you always add in the hashtag aging. And then also try and get some engagement for your social media posts where you can mention people or tag a company or tag your collaborators, because then they might comment on your post or they might share your post. So that's a way of getting extra reach and getting extra visibility for the texts that you then put on social media. Another one that I'm actually very fond of is blogs. So how can blogs help you to extend the reach of your research? Blogs are basically a great way of increasing connectivity because you can reach many different audiences outside of academia, and they basically allow you to make new connections with people. They're also a lot more flexible than social media in that the format can be longer, so you can actually write more. And they're also a lot more flexible with the amount of images or photos that you can add in, where you can put in the photos. You can even add in some video content. And then the nice thing about blogs is you can have links to your papers or links to your website. And then you can also share these blogs through all the social media platforms. And blogs are basically a great way of sharing insights, sharing discoveries, and really sort of bringing your own personal perspective to things. There are many different blog platforms out there to choose from. So either you could try and write a blog for an existing platform, be a guest blogger, or now it's also possible to create your own blog, for example, by using WordPress. WordPress actually has some really nice templates, and with a little bit of web editing savvy, it's quite straightforward to actually make your own blog. So that's a good way of creating more visibility and sharing your research findings. So an excellent example of a great blog is the Hello Bio blog. Personally, I really like it. I think it's a very useful resource. It features many different topics from many different researchers. And you'll also notice that the blogs are written in a very sort of engaging and accessible style. So they're sort of very easy to understand, and they have lots of interesting tips. So they're actually very nice to browse through. Also, being a guest blogger for Hello Bio is a great way to increase your visibility and for networking. A while ago, I wrote a blog article for Hello Bio about open science, because open science is something that I'm very, very interested in. And after my blog article, I had quite a few people contact me, and I've made a lot of new connections, and I got a couple of opportunities to work on some open science initiatives. So for me, it's really sort of opened up quite a few opportunities. So I would say definitely give blogging a go and see where it takes you. So another option besides social media and blogging are press articles. Now this can be a little bit more tricky than social media and blogging, because you need to attract the attention of the press. But the writing tips that we've gone through earlier are also very applicable to writing for press articles. So here we're talking about, for example, newspaper articles. And I would advise what you would first need to do is you would need to write a pitch to the press and try and write a press release. So I would say that the first thing that I would suggest you do is to connect up with your university press office and with your press officers and talk to them about, hey, you know, I've got these interesting research findings. Can we try and write a press release? Could you help me with this? Perhaps they can already give you some examples of how to write a good press release, or perhaps they can help you with that. Another thing that you should definitely do is to offer your expertise in expertise databases. For example, at the University of Antwerp, we have an expertise database where you as a researcher put in a little bit of information about yourself, some keywords related to your research, for example, aging, neuroscience. And then if journalists are looking for a scientist that they need for a specific press article on a certain topic, for example, if it's World Dementia Day coming up, then they'll do a search in that database, and then they'll perhaps find your name, and then they'll contact you, and then you can work with that journalist to write an article. So I would definitely sort of suggest that you do something like that as well. Now for the press, it's very, very important that you communicate your findings in plain language. And I would say it's one of the most common mistakes that I see researchers doing is where they are just too technical in their writing, that the writing is just too much filled with jargon and heavy technical language. And for the researcher, because that's all they've known, to them it makes perfect sense, but to an outsider they might think, I have no idea what you're talking to. What is this in vitro drug that you're testing? It doesn't make sense to me. So really take the time to make sure that you can communicate your findings in plain language. And you also want to highlight the impact of your research. So really emphasize the real world impact of your research. Those are two good tips to get started for the press. Then you could also try and pitch your research to various science magazines. For example, Danielle mentioned about pitching her research to a science magazine. And that's definitely something that you could also do. One that I quite like is The Conversation. It's quite a famous magazine. They do really nice topics. And then it's a matter of basically taking your research and writing an interesting pitch where you simplify your research, highlight the impact of it, and then see if, for example, The Conversation is interested in you working together with their team in writing an article for them. There's also New Scientist, Scientific American, Wired. Here in Belgium, we have EOS Magazine, which is also a very nice one. They even have their own blog site. Sometimes our PhD students are invited to write blogs for EOS Magazine. So check out the popular science magazines that are out there. You can connect up with their science writers and their journalists, for example, through Twitter or by email, and try your luck at sending out a pitch and see if they're interested in perhaps writing about your work. They're also a good starting place to learn how to write good popular science articles. So I would suggest to regularly sort of browse through these magazines and look at topics that are similar to your topic and just see how those journalists write, what writing style they use, and how they can make complex topics simplified, because often it's a very good starting point to learn how to do that yourself. So just in a nutshell, to summarize, here are some handy tips to get you righted, to help you with your writing. So focus on diversifying the writing outlets that you choose. So don't just put all your effort into writing scientific papers. You've put so much time and effort in your research. You've put so much time and effort into then getting it published. Then put in that little bit of extra effort to then also simplify your findings and publish them in other writing outlets. And this can be social media, this can be in blogs, this can be in press articles, science magazines, or even in books or book chapters. Perhaps, you know, it might be your ambition one day to write a popular science book or to write a chapter in an encyclopedia, for example, an encyclopedia of neuroscience. There's lots of options out there. So don't be afraid to explore the options and to hone your writing skills. Because like Jazmine mentioned, to have good writing skills is really important because you can then also use those good writing skills for writing your grants. Because if you can explain things clearly for a blog or on social media, you'll likely be able to do the same for your grant application. The number one thing to think about is to be clear and simple. So really avoid jargon and make your writing easy to understand. And as I said, as someone who reads a lot of other people's writing and works on editing it, I would say it's the number one mistake that I see is that the writing is just too complicated and too technical and that a lot of people just won't understand it. So really just keep it clear and simple. Know your audience. So adapt your style to your audience. If you're trying to reach companies, write in a style that would attract companies. If you're trying to reach students, then perhaps put in information that is interesting to students. So really think about first, who's my audience and how am I going to reach them? Then try and engage your readers by telling a story. I think it's human nature to be interested in a story. So use a clear narrative and find your own voice. As was mentioned in some of the previous panels and talks, there's lots of tools now to help you write, like ChatGPT and Grammarly. And these are all fantastic tools, and I would say embrace them. But I would also say be careful that your voice doesn't become the voice of ChatGPT. So find your own voice. It can often take a while to find that voice, but find your voice and your writing style, and then that's unique to you. Use examples in your writing. So always illustrate your points with real life examples. For example, if you've done field work somewhere, or if you've spent time in a different country, or if you've interacted with patients that suffer from the disease that you're researching, you know, use examples and add these examples in your writing. And always try and enhance your writing with good visuals. Text is important, but don't forget that the human eye is drawn to visuals. So you want to try and catch people's eye with a good photo or a good visual. So spend a bit of time in taking a good photo. And for example, if you're in the lab and you're doing an interesting experiment at that time, take a photo of the experiment, because you never know, you might be able to use that on your blog or on social media, or even for the press article. So enhance with visuals, that's very important. So creating diverse writing outlets not only increases the reach of your research, but it can also create new opportunities and connections. And you'd be surprised often by how many new opportunities you can create by just writing a simple blog article. For example, I have a colleague who wrote an article in a very popular science magazine. She was then contacted by an artist in a completely different country who said, "Oh, I'm very fascinated by your work. Would you like to collaborate on this art meets science project?" And then they collaborated, and then they ended up having a beautiful art installation at the University of Antwerp. So you never know sort of where your scientific writing will lead you. So see it as a way of networking, see it as a way of creating opportunities, and just getting your research out there. So I think that's one of the most important things to think about. Is it's not just about honing your writing skills, but it's also about creating opportunities. So remember, effective science writing is not just about disseminating information, but it's also about making connections. And it's these connections that basically also determine a lot of our career and our career path. So don't be afraid to put yourself out there, to write about your research and to make these new connections. So yeah, we've come to the end. Thanks for listening. If you have any questions, feel free to email me, and also special thank you to Hello Bio for everything that you do for researchers. I know that I definitely appreciate it, so thank you very much.
Oh, thank you so much, Bronwen. That was absolutely brilliant, and a great follow-on from Jazmine's talk earlier as well. And we've got a couple of minutes for some questions. So we've got a question in the chat. I guess when submitting pitches, etc., you need to get used to rejection. Do you have any tips for coping with being rejected?
Well, I think unfortunately rejection is a big part of life as a scientist. You know, so much of what we do gets rejected. I think use it as a learning experience. If you are going to be rejected, often take the time perhaps to follow up and say, why was it rejected? Is the topic not relevant? Was it not written properly? What can I do to improve? So try and get that feedback, and perhaps based on that feedback, then try and make improvements, and either try again at the same place if they seem like they're open to it, or then go elsewhere. But don't be afraid of rejection. It's normal. Try and learn from it and sort of move on.
Fantastic. And one final question: would you advise on getting your mentor or supervisor to review your writing and feedback to you?
Yes, definitely. It never hurts, does it? I think it's always good to sort of get some extra input and to sort of see what you think. On the other hand, also be aware that different people have different writing styles. I know that some of my colleagues have more verbose writing styles, whereas I have a more crisp, simple writing style, and that's okay. You know, if we all had the same writing style, then it would be a bit boring. So yes, definitely get feedback, but don't feel as if you have to have the complete same writing style as your supervisor. Like I said, sort of try and find your own voice.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Bronwen. That was absolutely brilliant. So we will move on to our final talk of today's Hello Bio LabLife Conference. And we are delighted to welcome Dr. Noelia Dominguez Falcon, who is a lecturer in biomedicine at the University of East Anglia. And Noelia will be talking about managing stress and anxiety and how we can support our well-being as scientists. So over to you, Noelia.
Thank you, Alice, for this really kind introduction. I feel a bit of pressure for being the last speaker of the day, but it's about well-being and stress management, so I'm hoping that it will be like a nice way to end the conference. So I'm going to share my slides. So thank you again, Alice, and the team at Hello Bio for inviting me for this talk. I'm very excited to be here. I collaborated with Hello Bio before, and it's been quite productive in terms of blog writing, so I'm really excited to be here. So like I said, today I'm going to be talking about how to manage the stress and anxiety in the lab, and basically a little bit of advice on how to break free from these intrusive thoughts. I have to make a small disclaimer for my talk because I think mental health is quite a personal thing. So I'm going to share my views and my advice based on my own personal experience, but this is not like a one-size-fits-all type of advice. I'm just hoping that it serves as an inspiration and perhaps spark a little bit of conversation maybe after my slides. So this is the index that I'm going to go through. Basically, what I'm going to talk about today is, first, I want you to get to know me a little bit because I guess none of you know who I am or where I'm coming from. Then I will be talking about why it's important to talk about mental health and this stigma around STEM careers. And this applies for every like step of the academic ladder. And then I will talk a little bit about my personal experience and different kind of like breaking points throughout my scientific career that kind of like not only allow me to sit with my feelings, but also being able to talk about them and give advice to other people. And then I will finish my talk telling you a little bit of sources of inspiration, which I think they are really important, especially if we think about the first networking talk that we have in this conference. So I think that's always quite nice to show to others. And then a few take-home messages for the evening. So first of all, get to know me. So like Alice said, my name is Noelia, and I am a lecturer in biomedicine at the School of Biological Sciences in Norwich in the UK. So I'm based in the East Coast, or as we call it, East Anglia. We have like beautiful landscapes. Everything is completely flat. There is no mountains whatsoever. There might be one or two, but everything is flat. So that's how everyone knows Norfolk. And the University of East Anglia is based on Norwich. So I lecture here in the biomedicine course, and I teach everything around the use of stem cells and the use of other techniques for biomedical research. But I also teach everything related to cell biology. And I'm also the social media officer for the school, and also I'm deputy senior advisor. So I actually deal with a lot of mental health issues coming from our students. These are two ways of contacting me if you want to. I'm more than happy to chat via email or Twitter or X, how you want to call it. And just so you know me a little bit more, I have hobbies outside of the lab, and this is outside of my teaching, and this is something that I did not used to have, and I think it was quite important to put it in like a mental health and well-being talk, if that makes sense. I love cooking. I spend a lot of my time in the kitchen. Kind of, I think it's maybe like a resemblance of my lab days, because now I mostly teach. I barely do any research anymore. I do a little bit with the research project students, but I'm mostly dedicated to teaching. So I love cooking. So you probably gathered by my accent, I'm not English, I'm Spanish. So as a Spanish person, I think we have a large tradition in cooking. I also like to have walks. So this is a picture of Norfolk. Like I said, it's very flat, and that's on the summer, so it's quite nice to see that kind of landscape. And I also love cycling. So on the weekends or on holidays and stuff, I go around with my bike because I really, really love it. So this is my scientific path so far. It's been a little bit different to what I used to think, but that's, I think, part of the journey as a scientist. So in 2012, I got my undergraduate degree in Spain, in my home country, and I did marine science. I was a little bit of a hippie back then. I loved, dolphins and whales and stuff, which has nothing to do with the degree that I actually did. We did a lot of maths and chemistry and physics. I loved it. When I finished that degree, I discovered that path was not for me. I kind of like felt that it was not fit for my purpose. I was always interested, especially towards the middle part of my degree. I was really interested in how humans can be treated with natural products and with like tissue engineering and all those kind of concepts that they were not particularly expanded in my degree. That's why in 2014, I kind of like specialized and narrowed down my scientific path, and I got a master's by research in biomedicine. So that's how I started in the lab. That was my first lab experience. And my first lab experience was in industry, which has nothing to do with an academic environment. So I started sort of the other way around. But I loved it. It was quite insightful. And that's when I decided that my life was about science and I wanted to continue in that path. Unfortunately, there was not a lot of opportunities, money and job-wise in my country. So I took the decision of say goodbye. And then in 2015, I arrived to Norwich for a 6-month contract, but almost a decade later, I'm still here. So that kind of like shaped itself as well. So I wanted to do my PhD, but it was not possible at the time. So I spent 2 years in the lab working as a research technician, and I started a little bit to supervise students, and then later on I got my PhD grant in 2017. So my PhD was about tissue engineering, but to regenerate tendons. So that was really interesting, and it's partly what I teach now in the biomedicine degree. And then I did a couple of postdocs, and I was always working in the School of Pharmacy, but I've always been like a biologist by training, and I've always loved teaching. Unfortunately, I was unsuccessful in 3 different fellowships, so for me it was quite hard to start to think about establishing myself as an early career researcher. I know these things are tough, but I've always loved teaching, and an opportunity came up in my actual department. So I took that lead because it felt kind of good. And then I got my lectureship last year, and I also got the status of the Fellowship of Higher Education Academy, which is kind of like a certification that you obtain in the UK to be able to teach in all the universities across the UK. So that's a little bit about me, so you get to know what's been my path and how did I arrive here. Another thing that I do is a lot of science communication. I love to communicate my science, and this only came up to me around my PhD. I wanted to give a lot of talks so I could be more prepared for my Viva. And that was one of the best decisions that I took, because every possibility that I had, I just went there and talked about my research. And I also did a lot of science communication. I'm not going to talk about this today, but I've always been passionate about the role of female in science. So a couple of years ago, or 3 years ago, I founded my own podcast, which is called I Belong Here. It's available in Spotify and Apple Podcasts if you want to have a listen. And that allowed me to open a lot of opportunities for myself, including getting to know the people and the team at Hello Bio, writing blogs. I also won an award in my university for the engagement that it had. So lots of opportunities, and one of the reasons why I'm here today as well, because I love to talk about different things about the lab, not only inside, but also outside. So why talking about mental health in STEM is really important. Now, this is a really particularly interesting topic, because I think, as Pedro was saying beforehand in the conference, mental health and well-being are really important. But I don't know about you guys, but I have not heard about it that much. So it's something like people do not really talk about it enough. And I think one of the reasons about this is because of STEM or science stereotypes. So if you think about if someone that has nothing to do with science, the majority of the people will think about, like a crazy person inside the lab is usually like a male figure with like crazy hair, kind of like resembling Einstein, and then making like potions and things like that, which, to be honest, that image from the chemistry, health and safety purpose, it's not really compliant, if that makes sense. So I think one of the reasons about why there is not a lot of mental health talk in science is because of this stereotype about science being hard, and then, like a discipline and a job that you need to be tough, and you just need to, in the nicest possible way, just suck it up and then just continue with it. This stereotype comes from, in my opinion, from early on, and depending on how we educate the next generations. So that was one of the aims behind my podcast. And one of the things that I try to teach now to our students is like, science is not about how you look like, it's about the impact that you make on your field and how you contribute to the scientific community. But from early on, I think now things are changing, but from early on, if you ask a kid to draw a scientist, it will mostly be a male figure, again, with like a crazy potion or a crazy discovery in their hands. Although while I was preparing this presentation, I found this study, and I put the reference if you want to have a look. This study is from 2018, but it's really interesting because it seems like, from the 80s to 2016, so kind of closer to where we are now, the percentage of female scientists being run is actually increased. So that's really good. I think we are moving in the right direction. But what I'm trying to tell you guys with this slide is that I think these stereotypes about science being tough and hard is one of the reasons why it's still a stigma
to talk about mental health among scientists, and actually most of the scientists will encounter mental health issues, especially at the lower academic ladder, especially students. Something that I also think it contributes to this is that, unfortunately, I think to the public, so when I say public, I say non-scientific audience, I think science always looks very inaccessible. It looks like sci-fi. When I tell my friends or to my partner what I did on my PhD, they look at me like, what? Like, you created what in the lab? And then obviously for us, it's extremely normal. And I think this image, sometimes I show this image to my students because sometimes we scientists talk about apples, but what the public receive is oranges or other fruits, insert the fruit that you would like, mostly because we need to exercise that science communication exercise. And because science looks very inaccessible from the outside and englobing all these stereotypes, I think this is why mental health is still a stigma among us, and even not only for scientists, but even for us as lecturers now. I realize that all of us are stressed, and it's not something that we all talk about per se. So especially in academia, I think industry has other type of conditions and job progression. So I'm just going to focus in academia and academic environments. I think the way science and the academic environment is presented, sometimes it also contributes to mental health being a stigma. So unfortunately in academia, there is a lot of factors that contribute to mental health issues. And I think this kind of like feeds itself into the system. So when I started my scientific career in the lab, I was a master's student, so I was thinking about doing my PhD and possibly be a group leader or a lecturer one day, which it seemed ages away from me. And then one of my supervisors, he told me, well, if you want to be someone in science, you need to do really good science. It needs to be groundbreaking. You need to publish a lot, and those papers need to be better than anyone else. And then I look at him and I was like, how on earth I'm going to do that? Like, I'm only a little person in the entire world of people that are working in my field, and I think this is something that puts so much pressure, especially in students, because I felt so nervous to, do nothing in my career. I was like, well, how many papers do I need? How many grants do I need to have to be someone? And I think this is a massive mistake. And sometimes this is being talked about in also among us, among lecturers. Like, when someone asks you about your research, sometimes it's more about how many papers have you published rather than how are you contributing to your field? Like, tell me about your research. So this puts a massive pressure, especially in people that are at the bottom of the ladder. And unfortunately, this always relies on students. Instability and insecurity is also a big factor. So salaries are not really good, especially again for students. There is also uncertainty always about your job. I mean, I think since I've been in the UK, I've had like 11 different contracts, some of them like a month long, because this is how things roll. This puts a massive pressure on yourself. I've always been quite determined to follow, but not everyone is going to be like that. And lots of people can actually break down with this pressure. For example, when can I buy a house? When can I start a family if my contract is going to finish next year? So this is a massive point of stress in a lot of people. Work-life balance as well. So how can you balance all the working hours that you need to publish all these papers, to be someone in science? How do I get that with a healthy lifestyle? This is also a big point of pressure among students, and also, to be honest, among everyone. And then family constraints as well. So if you are starting a family and you don't renew your contract, for example, in the city that you are in, can you really move to another city? Can you drag your family that they have also jobs? And if you have kids, maybe they are in the school or in, doing A-levels or preparing for university. And like I said, when do you start being a mom? When do you start being a dad? These are really important things that I think the system is not good at communicating to people, because with those pressures that I had only as a master's student, I think I was like 24 or 25, with all those pressures in, then how do you get people motivated? And this is something that I always try to tell my students. I want to motivate you to be a really good next generation of scientists, but not because you are going to publish a gazillion papers. It's only because you are going to do what you like and you are going to succeed at something that you love. But unfortunately, the system, I think, is a little bit broken in that sense. And we need more people, we need more role models, and we need more sources of inspiration to try to break these stigmas. Also, just to reinforce my point, there is actually studies. This study was published in Nature. This study was directed only for students. And then they interview students among the world, and then an alarming high percentage of people fairly often, for example, they feel stressed or unsettled at work. And then if you look at the right hand side of the slide, almost everyone, kind of like half between male and female, they suffer from anxiety or depression on a monthly basis, which I think is incredibly alarming. And it calls for action, and it calls for a change, which is not going to happen next week. It will take years. But I think the change comes from people, that we are already into the system, and we have unfortunately seen what's out there and how we can educate the next generation of students or scientists to try to not get into the system already thinking that they are going to fail and be depressed. So like I said, in this talk, I wanted to share a little bit of my personal experience. Now, this might not be the same for everyone, but I'm just hoping to serve as a little pool of inspiration, and then we can have like a debate if you guys want to. So I've never talked about mental health and stress out loud before, because when I was a research technician in my previous lab, we did have a certain culture of you need to be here at all times, doing experiments at all times. And although no one was telling you off for being in the office, reading a paper because it's needed, there was a certain culture among the people of like, ooh, you are not doing any work, or, ooh, it's 5 p.m. and you are going home. And it was this sort of air that was putting pressure on you to perform and to overwork, to show that you were better, which at that point I didn't realize how bad that was because it's a very toxic culture. And now, after almost a decade here and now educating students, I know how bad that is. So the first time I actually I was open to the idea of talking about mental health issues is thanks to the team of Hello Bio. They interviewed me first because of my podcast, and then they offered me to write a blog about anything that I wanted. They were quite understanding with the topic. And I thought, well, what if I talk about this? Because there was one particular week in my GSD that I went from the second floor to the ground floor. You know how it is. You have labs and you have rooms and freezers in every single floor of the building. And then I went down all the floors of my department, and then everyone that I found on the corridor was either running somewhere, stressed, not running like happily, it was stressed, or someone was about to break down because of a deadline, because of a talk, or because of something. And then when I went to the lab and I was by myself, I was like, why everyone is so stressed? Like, why everyone is feeling so down? And I was feeling down as well from other different reasons. So this blog kind of like fit really well in, but it was difficult because I wrote it quite openly. I was quite honest, and the Hello Bio team were absolutely amazing in allowing me that freedom. But once it was published, I was like, oh, maybe I should not have talked about those stuff, because I was quite honest with things that happened during my GSD that my supervisor had zero clue that this happened to me. So I felt a little bit ashamed of talking about these things, like, oof, people are going to think I'm crazy. I should have done just, get on with my science and then just forget about all this. And again, those are the feelings that the system kind of puts on you. And overall, I felt that I was exaggerating. I was, creating a big problem about something that was not really that bad. And I think this is one of the key issues with mental health issues among scientists. It doesn't matter what happens to you. It doesn't matter the feeling that you have. I think we need to educate ourselves that they are valid, and then we will do something about it, but not feel like I'm just going to scrape it off and then continue, culturing myself or going to this conference. I think we just need to take action as soon as possible. And then, even though this blog was about my own problems and my own stressful situations that I encounter in my PhD, I wanted people to read it. It had a lot of reads, so I'm quite happy about that. And I wanted people to feel a little bit related and feel like, oh, I also went through that. I can have some tips. I can have some advices. So one thing that I want to say is that the images, I hope you recognize who these two men are. So these images are not random. So if I go back one slide, the blog title is Under Pressure, Breaking Free from the Stress of Your PhD. So I love the band Queen and I love David Bowie. And kind of like the overarching aim of the blog was about the Under Pressure song, which is one of my favorite songs of all time. So for my presentation, I kind of like wanted to keep that aesthetic. So you will see images of these brilliant musicians. So one of the issues that I encountered throughout my PhD, and to be honest, it follows me now, even when I am now a lecturer, which we are supposed to have everything in place and be super top. And let me tell you that that's not how it is. We are all really stressed. We are all doubting about ourselves. So the first thing that I shared in this blog is imposter syndrome. So imposter syndrome is basically you always feel like a fraud, you underestimate your achievements, like, oh, I got my lectureship, or I got my PhD, or I succeed at my Viva because I got lucky. So it's basically underestimating your achievements because you feel like they are not given to you because you are valued. It's because they didn't have anyone else to give the job, the talk, whatever. Especially since my first lab experience, I've been suffering imposter syndrome basically every day of my career, even to the point of my Viva. I barely had any corrections. It was a 400 pages long thesis, and my examiners told me that it was incredible. And still after my Viva, I was like, oh, maybe it's just because, they didn't have anything else to say. And this is the problem with imposter syndrome, that because we are our worst critics, we always kind of like tell ourselves the worst. It's very tiring. It's very mentally exhausting. We all suffer from it. Even professors, they suffer from it. Even professors after years and years of teaching, sometimes after a lecture, they will be like, oof, that lecture was so bad. They didn't like it, etc. So in my blog, and now to you guys, I propose to use it to our advantage. So what if we talk to our imposter syndrome and actually confront it? So some of the tips that I will share today is like, we need to look at the things from the bigger picture. So usually imposter syndrome is about really particular things, particularly achievements that happen in our life. So one of the things that I like to do with my imposter syndrome is actually look for evidence. So has someone, or have you read somewhere actual evidence of all those bad thoughts that you have? Has someone actually told you that, oh, we gave you the job because you got lucky? I hope no manager tells you that ever in your life, because that would be really bad. So look for evidence and see if you can actually find these thoughts that you have and you keep repeating to ourselves. Then I will say seek help, networking, like we talk about today in this conference. Seek for help. It doesn't have to be your lab or your actual work environment. You can seek for help everywhere. And something that it helped with me a lot is to take some time to be at pace with my feelings. So I think sometimes we kind of like really rush ourselves to feel a certain way at a certain timeline, and that's not how the human brain works at all. So something that I did during my PhD is to have 2 journals. One that was a sunshine or a happy journal, and one that was a sad one. So on the happy journal, I put emails, text messages. Even now I use it when I get emails from my students like, oh, I love your lecture, or, oh, you've been so helpful with my assignment. I put everything there. It could be an Excel sheet. I'm an old school person. I like to write things down. So it could be anything. And then when you feel like, oof, I got lucky in my Viva, or I only got this job because I got lucky, then refer to that journal. So then you can actually see like, well, if I did indeed got lucky, or I'm not valued, then why am I getting all these opinions from these lovely people that, to be honest, they don't have to lie to you. They don't have to fake anything. So that's a really good pattern that I use. And then speaking of patterns, when I use my SAD journal is basically like a scrapbook where I write sentences about these thoughts, these intrusive thoughts that I have. So when you fill that journal for like, let's say, couple of months, you are going to see that certain sentences repeat themselves, because our brain always, when something is not really right, or we worry about something, at least my brain repeats always the same pattern of thoughts or fears or hesitations. And then one day I was reading through the SAD journal and I saw like, oh, this sentence was the same this month and then the following week. Hence, it might not be really true. It might just be your brain trying to convince you of things that we are scared about. So I highly recommend this. This is a little quote that I put on the blog. I just want to kind of like to emphasize it on the talk, but you guys can read it online if you wish. Here's David Bowie, one of the greatest musicians of all time. Sorry, I feel like I have to say this. Other thing that I encountered during my PhD, and I sometimes do it now as a lecturer, is overworking. So since I arrived to the UK, I can recall a weekend that I did not work in the lab. So I was always working every single weekend, bank holidays. I was missing holidays, trips to Spain, weekends with my friends, etc. Because I had this culture of, oof, I need to produce a lot of data. I need to do this. I need to publish a paper. So. And the paper, the pressure comes from all the angles. It could be papers, it could be working a lot to get that promotion, to get a grant, etc. So some of the tips that I would like to share about this is that we are all different. We all walk our own path, and because, excuse me, that's my phone. And just because we kind of like have a particular goal in mind and someone else is overworking or is doing something completely different, it doesn't mean that you have to do the same. I never knew that I was going to leave my country and lecture in biomedicine, and my path has not been perhaps traditional, but it's valid nonetheless. Overwork also means sacrificing a lot of time of your life for science, and I love science. I think is one of the best decisions that I took in my life, and now teaching science, it fulfills me. But if we are not okay, we cannot do our job okay. And I think this culture of, if you don't overwork and exhaust yourself, I think this culture has to stop. And like I said, this is not like one size fits all advice. I know that sometimes we need to work extra hours for that particular paper or for a deadline, but science is not our life. And this took me almost a decade to realize. Again, like another little quote from the blog, but you guys can read online. Grief. I want to put a little disclaimer because this is a sensitive topic. So I think all of us experience grief throughout our lives, sometimes several times. And I would like to say that this is something that not a lot of people talk about. So in my personal case, my grandma, which she was basically like my mom, she passed away in Christmas. So basically when this happened, I packed everything and I just had to leave because I was starting my PhD. And then I took the very bad decision of overworking, basically because I wanted to avoid any kind of feeling, any kind of thought. So I basically buried myself in 24/7 working. I was there every evening until 8 p.m. I was working every Saturday, every Sunday, to the point that I actually burned myself down, and I had to force myself to seek professional help because I took that decision kind of like with this culture of, well, it took me so long to have my PhD. Now I cannot fail. I cannot take time off. What kind of a student I will be if at the very start of my PhD I take time off? no, that's really bad. My supervisor will never allow it. My supervisor had no idea that I was going through this, by the way. This is one of the first advice that I want to say: seek for help to absolutely anyone that you think you can share your feelings with. In terms of the grief, I think prioritizing ourselves is the best way to go. We need to listen to our body and trust the process. It took me a few years to be able to talk about this openly, but by talking about it, you make yourself more relatable and you will help more people than you think. And then just to finish on a few notes, like I said, I think sources of inspiration are the best way to go, and not only the way we will inspire others, but also to break the system a little bit slowly. So you have tons of resources on the internet. For example, the British Science Association did a campaign a few years ago that is called Smashing Stereotypes. So there is like a lot of scientists across the world kind of like sharing their stories, and there is people from different backgrounds, from different job roles, and they are all online. So that's quite cool to see. A little bit of a spam. My podcast had that aim. So basically, my podcast was focused on female role models to kind of like enhance the role of female in science. And what I wanted to do was what I did was to interview female scientists across the globe, and then just to share the stories, because they all went through different issues. We talk about motherhood in academia, we talk about mental health, we talk about cultural, religion constraints. So we talk about many different issues that all of us have. They are not talked about enough, and I think it's very important to exemplify that. And sometimes I try to tell that to my students as well, because now they are starting to think about, where do I go? And as long as I am a teacher or a lecturer, I don't want any student thinking that they will not fit in, because they need to meet certain standards that will carry mental health issues for them. So yeah, just a few take-home messages for you guys. You are the most important piece of the puzzle that is your life. It seems really cliche and kind of like a mug message, like positive message in a mug. But it is true, and you know, a decade later, I'm being able to give a talk about this. It doesn't matter which situation you are going through; it is valid. You need to validate your feelings, and then start to nurture yourself. And then once you are okay, then you can educate others. And then, like I said, it's very important. You know, sometimes these mental health issues, they are associated to a feeling, a body response. Our body is way smarter than we think, and we need to identify that. We need to sit with it, and then take time to recover, and then obviously help others when we are feeling good with ourselves. Something you need, I think, is also important to find something that makes you smile outside of the lab, and then follow that. For me, it might be, like I said, the cooking or something else, and it actually helps me to not think about work and not actually doing anything related to my work. And I think once we try to educate ourselves and then think about that your life is about you, you need to grow, you need to discover yourself, you need to nurture yourself. Only once we are capable of that, and then we all help each other, then we can not only break the stigma of mental health in science, but also try to change the system a little bit. And I think this will only happen with collective effort. So yeah, I'm really thankful for being here today, closing the conference. It's kind of like a nice feeling. So yeah, thank you to everyone for listening to me, and for the Hello Bio team for inviting me.
Thank you so much, Noelia. That was a brilliant talk, and you've sparked a lot of discussion in the chat. So in our final couple of minutes, we probably have time for a couple of questions. I'm really sorry if we don't get to your question. I think this has been the most questions out of every talk. So a couple of people have asked, how would you advise setting boundaries with your supervisor about how much you're prepared to work, or if you have a very eager supervisor and they're insistent to the point that they're maybe texting you out of hours? What are your tips for setting boundaries in that situation?
I think if possible, the boundaries should be set as soon as you start. And now thinking about it, it might seem quite daunting, like, oh, I just started, she's the postdoc, whatever, and I'm already setting boundaries. It might seem really bad, but it is absolutely necessary. For example, when I started as a lecturer, one of the first things I did was to tell my students, like, unless you are in an emergency, I'm not replying to your emails in the evenings, and I'm not replying to emails on the weekends. And I felt rude. I was like, oh, these students are really not gonna like me, and I just started. But at the same time, it's like, it's you are the one who is doing the work. If you are not okay, you are going to have to take time off the lab, and then your supervisor needs to understand that. And this also took me a few years to say it out loud. If your supervisor doesn't respect you as a human, then it's not a good supervisor. And it took me years to realize this, because your supervisor is there to mentor you and to help you to become a good scientist, not a copy of him or her. And I'm so sorry for being so blunt, but it's, you know, I think it's just, I see so many PhD students breaking down of pressure, like, because I work in the lab to the point of like having palpitations. And then now I think about it and it's like, why? Of course, I got a lot of papers during my PhD. I love my PhD. I love my thesis. I'm having it in my office, and now I see it now, and I love it. But it's your body, you know, it's your health. So put the boundaries as soon as you can, and then if they don't respect you, you will have other people in your department that will help you for those rules to be respected. Sorry, that was a long answer.
No, that's a brilliant answer. And another thing a couple of people have mentioned as well is imposter syndrome. So someone said, I see lots of my students suffering from imposter syndrome. Is it possible to help them to overcome it, or is it something that students can only learn themselves?
Undergrad students, you mean?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So something, I think it comes with the journey. So now as a lecturer, I do see that students carry a big pressure. The students that care about their future and about their marks and their future, the students that care, they carry a lot of responsibility, like, oh, if I don't have this particular mark, I'm not performing, or I got a 60 instead of a 90, hence I'm a bad student. I think the first thing we need to do as educators is to manage their expectations. When we manage a students' expectations, they will be way more realistic with what they can and what they will achieve. And then they will carry imposter syndrome nonetheless. So something that I've learned as well being an educator is that we are not moms and dads. So they need to pass their own grief. They need to go through that bad feeling before, you know, like becoming their own person. And I think now the newer generations are being young adults for longer, because I see this in my students. I think there is certain delay. When I was 21, I didn't have the same issues as my 21s now. It's a completely different, I mean, this could be a whole new conference, so I'm not going to get into a lot of detail. I will say students like to know that they have a point of reference to go to. So they know you're there. They might not approach you because the newer generations are also very timid in asking for help. But if they see, if they can see themselves reflected on you, they will approach you at their own time. So make yourself visible, make yourself approachable as well, and talk about what troubles you. Sometimes, especially as lecturers, students see us as, you know, like, you know, like Marvel superhero, that we have zero emotions and we are just like a block, and it's just completely the opposite.
Yeah, absolutely. Fantastic advice and a fantastic talk. Thank you so much, Noelia. And with that, sadly, the conference has come to an end. So this concludes the Hello Bio LabLife Conference 2024. Thank you so much to all of you for joining us today. And of course, a huge thank you to all of our fantastic speakers and panelists. wherever you are, please do give them a big virtual round of applause. And if you would like to find out any more about us at Hello Bio and what we do, you can head on over to hellobio.com, where you can take a look at all of our research products, antibodies, biochemicals and reagents, which are around half the price of other suppliers. You can also check out our blog, which has several years worth of excellent content written by fantastic life scientists, including many of those you've heard speak today. If you are interested in contributing to our blog as a writer, if you want to exercise those brilliant writing tips you've heard today, you can email us at hello@hellobio.com, and we always welcome contributions from our community. You can also sign up for our weekly newsletter, where we will send you the latest offers, info about our new free trial program, all of our latest blogs, and any other resources that we have created for scientists direct to your inbox. So thank you so much. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day, wherever you are in the world, whatever time it is for you. And we hope to see all of you again very soon. Thank you so much.